The subject for today is mindfulness, sati. But as before, we're just going to briefly review the previous classes. The first class we did the overview of what early Buddhism was, what is the scope of early Buddhism, the texts, and just the general background to what we're doing when we're doing early Buddhism. The second day we looked at the historical context and we looked at the Brahmanical scriptures, particularly the dialogue with Yajnavalkya and Maitreyi, and a bit of a look at some of the Jainism and some of the way that the Buddha responded to that. And we saw that the Buddha always used a discerning attitude, that he neither blithely rejected nor blithely accepted everything from the previous traditions, but rather he would use his discernment and his wisdom, and some things he saw were good, and he would be very happy to adopt those. And other things that he saw were not good, so he did not adopt those things. And on the third day, we looked at the purpose of the Buddha's teachings, to find freedom from suffering, freedom from samsara, and the main outlines of the Dhamma teaching, the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. Yesterday we started looking at the meditation practice more closely, beginning with the practice of right effort. And because all meditation must begin with doing meditation, and if we don't have right effort, then nothing else will go. So of course right effort applies more broadly than just in meditation, obviously, as does right mindfulness. Nonetheless, in the Eightfold Path, their primary focus is on the establishing of meditation practice. And we did some exercises where I asked people to find some creative and innovative ways to support people to meditate. And you did not disappoint. They were indeed creative and innovative. Okay, fine. And I asked for the memorization exercise for yesterday to learn the formula for the four right efforts. Anupananang papakanang akusalanang dhammanang upadaya chandang janeti vayamati viryangarabhati citam paganhati padahati. Who wants to go next? Adrian, you're looking very happy.
Just having some last night.
Can someone memorize the four right efforts in Pali? No? Oh dear, a bit disappointing, isn't it? What about in English? The four padanas, four samapadanas, yeah. Can do in English? Go on. You save face for the entire class. Yeah. Okay. But the detailed formula. Can't remember? That's right. So that's like the summary of each of the four. That's correct. Who can say it in English? Okay, very good. So today also we have a memorization. We have to memorize the detailed formula for the four satipatthanas. Right? Kaya anupasi viharati atapi sampajano satima vinayalo kaya bijadomana sang. Not that hard, all right? Okay, let's go. So, mindfulness, sati, is essential in every aspect of the path. Nonetheless, it comes to the fore in meditation, and to begin meditation is to establish mindfulness. Mindfulness knits together awareness, unifying the past and the future in the present. It is the presence and continuity of reflective awareness. So we are primarily focusing on reading from the Satipatthana Sutta today. However, I will be giving some historical analysis as well, because the Satipatthana Sutta itself, while it is a primary source work, it is a composite sutta. And the different parts of it were put together some centuries after the Buddha. In fact, the Mahasatipatthana Sutta is one of the latest suttas in the Pali Canon. And we know this is the case because the versions of the Satipatthana Sutta in the different agamas are quite substantially different than the Pali. And of all the kind of the major teachings, I think the differences in the Satipatthana Sutta are perhaps the most interesting. Specifically, in the Theravada tradition, it's normally taken for granted that Satipatthana is primarily a practice of vipassana, but this is not the case in any of the Chinese versions, and it's also not the case in the Satipatthana Samyutta. In fact, the idea that Satipatthana is closely related to vipassana is really only derived from the passage on rise and fall, which was inserted into the Satipatthana Sutta, and that passage on rise and fall is not found in any of the parallel versions. And in fact, if we look at the Satipatthana Samyutta, only in one or two suttas does it really talk about doing vipassana. And if we look at the vipassana sections of the canon, so those portions of the Pali Canon that actually do talk about vipassana, that is to say the Khandha Samyutta, Salayatana Samyutta, Dhatu Samyutta and other places, then they never refer to Satipatthana. Okay? Not one single time does Satipatthana come up in any of those discussions where the Buddha is actually talking about doing vipassana. Okay? So the purpose of Satipatthana in the suttas is to support samadhi. All right? And so if we're understanding early Buddhism, then this is one of the major differences between the perspective of early Buddhism and the perspective of the 20th century meditation schools. All right? So you will be told many, many times that Satipatthana is vipassana, and that's the teaching of the various meditation teachers and so on. But that's not how it is in the suttas, and you have to know this, because if you don't, you will misread the way that you're reading the suttas. You will have that perspective to read things into the suttas that are simply not there. So it took me a long time to work this stuff out. I wrote a whole big, long, complicated book about it. But I'm not going to bore you with all of the details, but we are going to look at some of the things that I learnt while doing all of my research. Okay. So, in the Satipatthana Samyutta, so the main collection of discourses on Satipatthana are found in the Satipatthana Samyutta. And there we find many small suttas, Satipatthana from different perspectives. And some of those are very interesting. But what we don't find in the Satipatthana Samyutta is a sutta that gives a detailed explanation for each of the four factors of Satipatthana. Remember yesterday I talked about the Vibhanga suttas, which are giving us the explanation for each of the factors. So yes, we do actually have a Satipatthana Vibhanga sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, but it's a bit unusual and it doesn't really give the full explanation for the facts, for the four kinds of Satipatthana that you might expect. So that detailed explanation is found in the Satipatthana Sutta, in the Majjhima Nikaya and Digha Nikaya, which is not actually called a Vibhanga Sutta, but in fact is a Vibhanga Sutta in terms of the style of it. And so that's where we get out, that's where almost all modern studies on Satipatthana derive, or basically exclusively from the Satipatthana Sutta, and mostly ignore the suttas in the Samyutta Nikaya, or at the very most, if they mention them, they're kind of an afterthought, whereas in fact historically it should be the other way around. The suttas in Samyutta Nikaya are early, and the Satipatthana Sutta was developed later. Now, be clear about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying here. I'm not saying that the Satipatthana Sutta was just invented at some later time. I'm saying it was composed by bringing together different aspects and different teachings on Satipatthana and then including them all in one collection, right? So it's a matter of it being edited and put together at a somewhat later time. For example, if we look at the Sarvastivadana, Mahasangika and other versions of this in Chinese, we find that the list of meditations under Kayanupassana is somewhat different. So for example, some of them, I think the Ekotarakagama one includes contemplation of food under Kayanupassana, right? Whereas in the Pali version we don't have that. And so on. So there are these differences in the way that it's been compiled. Right? This is still talking about the same kind of thing, but details have changed in the way it's compiled. All right, so let's have a look. Actually, I might just, before I go to that one, I might just do this one first. I'm actually going to just read quickly the first sutta. Oops, I'll give this what's on the screen. All right, very good. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Vesali in Ambapali's wood. There, the Buddha addressed the mendicants. So this is probably near the time of the Buddha's parinibbana, when Ambapali had donated her place for the Buddha as a monastery. There the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, Venerable Sir, they replied. Mendicants, the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation are the path to convergence. Ekayang dvayang bhikkhave maggo sattanang visuddhiya sokapridevanang. They're in order to purify sentient beings, to get past sorrow and crying, to make an end of pain and distress, to end the cycle of suffering and to realize extinguishment. What for? It's when a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of the body, keen, aware and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. They meditate observing an aspect of feelings, keen, aware and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. They meditate observing an aspect of the mind, keen, aware and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. They meditate observing an aspect of principles, keen, aware and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. The 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation are the path to convergence. They are in order to purify sentient beings, to get past sorrow and crying, to make an end of pain and sadness, to end the cycle of suffering, and to realize extinguishment. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, the mendicants were happy with what the Buddha said. All right, so this is a basic statement on Satipatthana. We have a very small narrative background. We're simply told the setting. In fact, the setting is a little bit more interesting than it seems from there, because in fact the monks were sitting there in Ambapali's wood when Ambapali, the famous and stunningly gorgeous courtesan, came to visit the Sangha. And then the Buddha said, "Monks, be mindful." And this is the time when he taught the mindfulness meditation, okay? So the actual, the narrative setting gives us a bit more background, right? Okay, so I'll begin by briefly commenting on the main formula for Satipatthana, okay, which we have here in Pali and English. So, ida bhikkhave bhikkhu kaya kayanupassi viharati atapi sampajano satima vinaya loke abhijja domanasam. Okay, so let's go through this term by term, because this is a very important formula, and it has a major kind of impact on how we approach our practice. So, first of all, it says a mendicant meditating. Obviously, it can mean anybody who's meditating, and the commentary also confirms that. So it's not just for bhikkhus, it's just by convention that it mentions bhikkhus there. Kayanupassi, all right? So this is an idiom which is usually translated as one contemplates a body in the body. Literally, kaya is a locative singular case, and kayanupassi, a body in the body. But the locative case in Pali has many different senses. Okay, so it doesn't just mean in, it can mean with respect to, it can mean about, it can mean regarding. Okay, it has a whole bunch of different senses. And I think that translating it overly literally is kind of missing the point here. So how do we know exactly what the idiom is meaning? Well, it's explained elsewhere in the Satipatthana Samyutta. I think it's in the Satipatthana Vibhanga Sutta, actually, that it says, for example, that the breath, the asasapasa, is a certain body among the bodies. Kayesu anyatarasmin kayang. Yeah. So a certain body among the bodies. Yeah, the breath is a certain body among the bodies. So obviously what that means is that the breath is a certain aspect or a certain part of the body. Right? And so that makes sense when you look at the Kayanupassana meditations, because each of them refers to looking at the body in a different way, looking at a different aspect of the body. So you can look at the body in terms of the four elements, you can look at the body in terms of the postures, you can look at the body in terms of the contemplation of death and so on. And all of these you're looking at the body in the same way, but you're focusing on a particular aspect. All right? So this is why I've translated this according to the evident meaning, rather than, I think, overly literally to translate it as body in the body. And it also is weird when you get to the other ones, like contemplating a mind in the mind and so on. That's a kind of, doesn't really make that much sense. So contemplating an aspect of the body. The word observing I have here, anupassi. So anupassi is from the root passi to see, and anu along with. We've already met anu in the previous classes. So anu means along. Yeah? And when anu is used in a psychological context, anu usually means continually. Yeah? Anu has this kind of stretching sense. Yeah? So to vitaketi is to think, to anuvitaketi is to keep on thinking. Right? So to passi is to look, to anupassi, to keep on looking, yeah? Continually looking. Yeah? So it's a process of a continual observation of something. Now when I changed the translation from contemplates to observes. Why? Because, well, this one's actually very specific, because I was at Bodhinyana and I was with a bunch of the monks there, and I said, what do you think, when they translate contemplates, what do you think contemplates means, to contemplate something? And all of them said contemplates means to think reflectively about something, right? Which is not what vipassi means at all. Yeah? I mean, there are plenty of words in Pali that do mean that, right? You have pachavekati and patisankha and so on, which are words meaning to think in a reflective way about something. But anupassi does not mean that. So I translated it as observing. Watching. Yeah? You could translate it as keep on watching. Yeah? Keep on observing. I thought observing because it had a kind of scientific flavour to it. You're like, what's going on with that? Keep on observing, yeah? Kaya anupassi viharati. And I think I mentioned this earlier, that this is a what do they call it? Like an adjunct verb. I can't remember the specific term for it, but viharati is a verb that literally means to dwell or to stay, but in Pali it frequently functions in a sense to indicate duration. All right? Viharati indicates duration. So you could say it's when a mendicant stays observing an aspect of the body. Yeah? A mendicant remains observing the aspect of the body. Yeah? But in context, it's often used to mean meditation. So we have the Brahma Viharas, yeah, which are the divine abidings in meditation. We have the Nava Anupubba Vihara, the 9 successive Viharas, which are the 4 jhanas, 4 formless attainments, and the attainment of cessation. And many other instances where the word viharati is used idiomatically to mean meditation. So here I've translated in accordance with the evident meaning rather than translating it more literally. You could say a mendicant dwells or a mendicant stays. So I've used a mendicant meditates. A mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of the body. Okay? So its traditional translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi would be a mendicant dwells contemplating a body in the body. So I tried to make mine at least more clear, so that somebody who did not know what it's talking about would know what it meant. Okay, then keen, atapi. Again, I think Bhikkhu Bodhi has ardent, which is quite correct, but unfortunately ardent means that you're in love with someone. That's usually the main connotation that people have. So I put keen instead. Atapi just means that you're practicing with... actually, this is just the factor of right effort. So atapi is signifying that you have the factor of right effort. Sampajano is atapi, keen, aware. Yeah? And here I've just translated it as aware, and where I have more space, I'll translate it as situational awareness. So sampajano here is an adjectival form, but when it's a noun, sampajanya, it means the situational awareness or the contextual awareness of what is going on. Right? Awareness of what is the cause of something, awareness of what is the purpose of something. Right? So the awareness of what's going on around, it's an all-round awareness. So this is an aspect of wisdom. All right? But it's not wisdom in the sense of a deep wisdom of like vipassana or insight into the Dhamma or anything like that. Sampajanya is a preparatory form of wisdom. Sampajanya, in fact, is developed even before practicing meditation. So sampajanya is what you have when you're walking around and you're being aware of your context and so on. This is situational awareness. So this is the sort of general awareness aspect of wisdom. So we have energy, we have wisdom, and satima, of course, meaning that one is possessed of mindfulness. Now, satima, I'm first of all just going to make just a comment about bhikkhuni's names, and too many nuns are called Satima. Satima is the masculine form, unfortunately, so it's like calling a bhikkhuni John. People think it's a feminine form because it ends with the long A, but not all words that end in long A are feminine. Some are masculine. Pali is a bit more complicated than that. Satimanti is the feminine form. I just thought I just had to share that with you for this morning. Okay. Vinaya loke abhijja domanasang. So satima means possessing mindfulness. Okay, so again, what is mindfulness? Now we already saw yesterday, or maybe even the day before yesterday, we saw the definition of mindfulness in the 5 spiritual faculties, where it defined mindfulness as the ability to remember what was said and done long ago. Okay, so this is one of the aspects of mindfulness, is memory. Yeah? Not memory in the sense of getting caught up in the past, right? But memory in the sense of maintaining a sense of continuity, so you have the capacity to recall things. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then the final factor here, vinaya loke abhidha domanasang. So this also is a somewhat tricky one to translate. I've said rid of desire and aversion for the world. There are two details here in the translation that sometimes translators will translate differently. First of all, the form vinaya can either be an absolutive, as I've translated it here, indicating that something has been completed in the past, rid of desire and aversion. It can also be translated as an optative, which would have the sense of one should be rid of desire and aversion for the world. Okay? And some translators translate it in that way. Now, the justification for that would be that when you're starting to meditate, you haven't already got rid of desire and aversion for the world. Right? Right? So it can't be the absolutive, because that implies that that's already been done, and if you've already done that, then why bother meditating? Right? Poof. Take it easy, go relax, lie on the beach, good enough, okay? But it's a little bit more tricky than that. And this was actually something that was pointed out by Venerable Brahmali many years ago. And he pointed out that this phrase, abhijja domanasang, is used in two contexts in the suttas. Two main contexts, one context being here, and the other context being in sense restraint, the practice of sense restraint. And so in the practice of sense restraint, which remember is a preliminary for meditation, right? Part of the gradual training, we talked about it a couple of days ago. So restraining the senses is something that we do before we start meditation. Why do we practice sense restraint? So that those unskillful qualities of desire and aversion for the world do not overwhelm the mind. Yeah? The same factors we have here. Yeah? So what this means, it doesn't mean like you've completely got rid of greed and delusion. What it means is that you've practiced sense restraint so that you've managed to let go of the more coarse and strong forms of these things. In fact, abhijja, I'm just wondering if I've translated that correctly there. Abhijja is usually used in the sense of covetousness. So it usually means, like, it's actually like quite a strong form of desire. It doesn't mean like the kind of normal forms, like just the very subtle forms of desire, or all forms. It means covetousness. I'm just wondering if I should change my translation there, see if that's a mistake. Rid of desire and aversion. I'll reconsider my translation of that to see if I can make that more clear. So this is the sense here. So atapi means you're applying right effort. Sampajano means you have that contextual wisdom and understanding. Satima means you have that mindfulness. And vinaya loke abhijja domanasang means you have prepared your mind through sense restraint to let go of the more overwhelming and troubling levels of the defilements. All right? English. I hate footnotes. I loathe them. Footnotes are the first resort of the incompetent meditator. I was saying a competent translator. Sorry, yes, you're right.
Could you then say what she just said then rather than that?
I could, yeah. The translation should mean what the thing means, right? Yeah. I'll have a think about it. You have to make so many different choices with these things. The other problem with footnotes, with that kind of thing, is that, of course, this passage appears 100 times in the suttas? Do you put a footnote every time? Yeah. It's tricky, actually, yeah. So footnotes do have a purpose, but one of the things when I'm translating, this is something that I've saw what you've said, most translators say this, and so this is a lesson for all of those who are thinking of doing translation. Translators will always say, oh yes, I'll just make a note about it. Yeah? No. Just translate it. Make it clear from that the person should be able to read it and know what it means. Yeah? And if you're relying on your footnotes to make the meaning of the translation clear, you're doing translation wrong. Yeah? So I will think more about that. There's probably a better way of translating that. Maybe I could restore just putting covetousness there. It makes it a bit more specific. But it's, but one of the things that also, like, you want to make the meaning clear, this is true, but it's also a passage that the meaning's a little bit difficult to tease out even in the Pali, actually. So also you don't want to over-explain in your translation. If something's unclear in the Pali, it should also be unclear in the translation. But if it's clear in the Pali, then it should be clear in the translation. Yeah? So this is the balance we try to make. Yeah. It doesn't mention that in the text. Yeah. So the text leaves that link up, for the student to discern. That's right, yeah. Also should mention here domanassa, also a little bit tricky, but not actually controversial. Domanassa normally means mental unhappiness. And we've actually already met this meaning of domanassa as mental unhappiness in the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. But sometimes domanassa also is used in the sense of aversion. All right, so this is the meaning in this particular case. So then the same thing applies with the other four satipatthanas. In the feelings, just very briefly, contemplating an aspect of feelings. So the feelings, of course, pleasant, painful, and neutral feelings. And of course, different aspects of the feelings means that you're focusing on those different feelings as they arise. But also, there's something a bit more purposeful to it than this, because we're also looking, like if you look in the way that anapanasati is described, then you're looking at the growth of rapture and bliss through this. Yeah? And so actually the primary aspect of feelings in satipatthana is the feelings of rapture and bliss and pamoja which you're developing in your meditation. Of course, it's broader than that, also includes neutral feelings and painful feelings, yeah? But the main aspect is those pleasant feelings that you're developing. They meditate observing an aspect of the mind, and again, we'll look at this in more detail, but this is the mind as it is affected by various states, like greed, hate, and delusion, or the absence of those things, but also especially refers to the mind in various states of samadhi. So cittanupassana has a close relationship to samadhi. Finally, dhammesu dhammanupassi viharati atapi sampajano satima vinaya loke abhijnadomanasang. So an aspect of principles, and we'll look at this more closely later on, but the word dhamma, of course, can be translated in many different ways, and we always, when translating dhamma, we always have to be sensitive to context as to what exactly is being taught. So there are different kinds of possible translations that different translators have used here. One, you could translate it as phenomena, okay, observing phenomena, okay, that sounds fine, except the body is also a phenomena. Feelings are a phenomena. Chitta is a phenomena, so maybe not. Some people translate it as observing mind objects. Okay, but then in the Satipatthana Sutta it also includes, for example, the eye and sights, which are not mind objects. So that also seems a little bit suspect. So what I think it means, and what we will look at more closely as you go through, is it means understanding the principles of the Dhamma, the principles of how the mind works, particularly the 5 hindrances, how they affect the mind, the principles of causality, what happens to your mind when you have these 5 hindrances, what happens to the mind when you have the 7 awakening factors, but also the principles of the Dhamma, as in the Four Noble Truths. All right? So these are the this is what the meaning of principles is that the faculty of wisdom is coming to the foremost, and you are understanding how the mind works. All right, so any questions on that before we go on? We will return to all of these, but any questions before we go on? Niloshi.
Feelings includes both a sort of pleasant, neutral, painful.
Yes.
This for both physical and mental aspects.
That's correct, yeah. Madhu. Basically, yes. Yeah. All right. And then we return to the opening section. 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation are the path to convergence. They're in order to purify sentient beings, to get past sorrow and crying, to make an end of pain and sadness, to end the cycle of suffering, and to realize extinguishment. Now, I mentioned yesterday, on the second day, we looked at the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and we noted that there is an extensive passage in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad that talks about the ekayano, right, or the ekayana. And just as the eye is the ekayana of all sights, the ear is the ekayana of all sounds, the voice, the mouth is the ekayana of all sounds, and so on and so forth. And so it has that sense of where things are coming together. And it's to draw the connection between those two places, as I also noted then, is not arbitrary, because we did see that many of the ideas, images, terms, passages in that specific Upanishadic passage were reflected in the suttas. Right? It's a specific passage that is very, very closely linked to the suttas. And moreover, I mentioned that we're going here. Is that here? I thought that was here. No. Let me just see if I can find that sutta. There's a sutta where this line is taught. Now I'm frustrated because I should know where this is. Why aren't you working? Come on, search. Nope. Search is not playing nicely today. Should find it. I do not know why that's not working. So anyway, there's a passage in where one of the suttas where Brahma Sahampati comes to visit the Buddha, and the Buddha says he's practicing this ekayana maggo, and Brahma echoes this. So the words ekayana maggo actually come from or are put into the mouth of Brahma himself. So to say that this is a term derived from the Brahman scriptures is not arbitrary, it's actually literally in the suttas that Brahma says these things. So the significance of it is that the word eka in Buddhist meditation always refers to samadhi. Eka is never a word for basically anything else. Ekagata, ekodibhava, ekata, and all of these words all refer to the experience of samadhi. So oneness is very closely related to samadhi in all meditation contexts. So essentially what it's saying here is mindfulness meditation leads to samadhi. And so this is something which we find repeated many other times in the suttas. Let's have a look at some examples. Any questions before we move on? Oh yeah. Yes, ekayana is eka plus ayana, means going. So eka, going to one. Yeah.
So eka,
Ekamaga, eso vamago visuddhiya. What does it say? Eko vamago naduti mati, yeah? That's eko, that's a single path. Yeah. You see, what happened with ekayana is that because it's a specific term used in that context within the Upanishads, and of course, as I've been emphasizing, the Buddha was living in that world, right? He was talking to people who were students, virtually, almost direct students in some cases probably, of Yajnavalkya, right? But the later Buddhist traditions weren't talking to them. The later Buddhist traditions were talking to other Buddhists, and they weren't studying the Upanishads, and they didn't know what the Upanishads said. And we know this from a lot of things we find in the commentaries and so on. So a lot of that context has been lost. Why I'm trying to restore that context. Yeah? I mean, of course, the later Buddhists were sort of generally familiar with like Vedic traditions and Brahmins and things like that. Sure, Brahmins were around and they're familiar with that. But like that kind of detailed, specific knowledge of particular Upanishadic texts, no, we don't find that in later Buddhist traditions. So I think what happened, they kind of forgot or lost sight of the fact that this was used in that particular context. And one of the signs of that is that in the commentaries to this, it'll give it many different explanations. So there's like 5 different explanations for this word in the commentaries, which is always a hint that maybe they didn't quite know what it means. So we can give a lot of different explanations. And if you look in the Chinese, actually the Chinese then give a number of other different explanations and translations. So they understood it differently again. Yeah? Again, I mean, they're not kind of bad or wrong explanations, right? I mean, they're saying that this is a way that leads a direct path to Nibbana or something like that. And they're not bad translations or anything, but it's just kind of missing that nuance of that context of where it actually comes from. So this is a fairly typical sutta in the Satipatthana Samyutta. And so you can see it's taking those same basic principles of Satipatthana, it's presenting them in a specific context, right? So it's giving us a new context for it, and it's also detailing the teaching in a slightly different way. So it's giving us a bit of a variant on the usual formula for the teaching. And presumably, I mean, it doesn't give us that much of a narrative background, but presumably that was done for, that was what was necessary at that time for those students. So the Buddha was speaking to what was required for those. So first thing, they have the distinction between the junior, those who are trainees, and those who are perfected, arahanto, okay? So there's 3 groups of people, right? So those who are nava achirapabhajita, yeah? So they've recently gone forth. So this is for beginners instructions. They should be instructed to establish it, and so this is in an imperative form for all the Pali geeks here. Viharata, you should meditate this way, yeah? In order to truly know the body. Now, obviously, one of the distinctive features of this is that in changing the formula, we're introducing some new terms, right? So instead of atapi sambhajano satima vinaya loke abhijja domanasang, we have atapi, it's in plural form, so the words look a bit different, but it's atapi sambhajana ekodibhuto vipassana citta samahita ekagatitta kayasa yatha bhutang jnanaya. So then the question one should ask is, does this mean that the Buddha is teaching a different Satipatthana here? Is he teaching one Satipatthana to some and then another Satipatthana to others? Do some get the better Satipatthana and then others get the ordinary generic store brand Satipatthana? I don't think so. I think he's teaching the same Satipatthana to everyone, but highlighting different aspects of it to suit the purposes of the time. And so here, obviously, it's highlighting the aspect of samadhi, right? And that aspect is much more clear, much more explicit in this text than it is in the normal Satipatthana formula. Ekodibhuta is a term normally found in the second jhana. Vipassana chitta also has a meaning of being clear. It's like a samadhi term. Samahita, literally in samadhi. Ekagga chitta, again, being a term normally used in the context of samadhi. So all of these terms refer to getting into samadhi or getting into jhanas, and then it says yatha bhutang jnanaya, so that you may truly know the body. Kayasa yatha bhutang jnanaya. And of course there it's introducing that vipassana aspect. Right? Now I said before that in the early suttas it doesn't equate satipatthana with vipassana, right? As is often found in modern days, right? But of course, everything is connected, right? It doesn't mean that satipatthana is completely separate from vipassana, because that would be weird, right? I mean, it's just the mind, it's just kinds of meditation, and everything is connected to everything else. So yes, of course, there is a vipassana aspect to satipatthana. That aspect emerges from the practice. So that vipassana aspect you can see here comes at the end. When you're already practicing samadhi, then you see these things as they really are. And of course, this is the normal state of things in Buddhist meditation, that one who has samadhi will know and see things as they really are. And similarly with feelings and mind and the principles. So this is those new meditators, and they are being urged in the imperative form to do this. But those who are trainees, that is to say those who are stream enterers, okay, then they also meditate in the same way. But it doesn't say that they should meditate in the same way, right? It says that they do meditate in the same way. So that for them, it's natural. They've seen the Dhamma. Right? So realize the Dhamma. Of course, normally you meditate. Why not? Why wouldn't you? Because it's a natural way of being. And so they're doing this. Why? So as to fully understand the body. Kaya sat parinyaya. Again, if you recall, a couple of times during the course, I've pointed out the distinction between the knowledge of the stream enterer and the knowledge of the arahant. Okay? And I pointed out that in the Tevijja, it usually has the formula for seeing the Four Noble Truths, idang dukkang and so on, in terms of suffering. And then it has the Four Noble Truths in terms of the defilements, ime asava and so on. And I said that the first one is stream entry and the second one is arahantship. Same thing you see in, same pattern you see in, say, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. It says idang dukkang, this implies stream entry, dukkang parinyeya is the role of the stream enterer or the seeker, is to fully know, and parinyata, it is fully known, and this is the state of arahantship. And so parinya is a technical term that always refers to arahantship in Buddhism. All right? So this is why it's a difference. So the stream and the new one, yatha bhutang jnanaya, in other words, to realize stream entry, to become a stream enterer. This is what this idiom means. So these idioms are used very specifically and very precisely throughout Pali, okay? And there's a way you can decode some of the usages, right? But but that's something you can only sort of, you have to sort of be very sensitive to it. I mean, it's not necessarily 100% consistent, right? Because this is not engineering, it's literature, right? But most of the time that you'll find that usage, when it talks about yatha bhutang jnana dasana, usually is referring to stream entry. Whereas parinya, actually that one is very, very consistent. This one is always referring to arahantship. So what this means is one who's new needs to practice satipatthana in order to realize stream entry, and then one who is already a stream enterer or above then needs to practice to have the full knowledge of arahantship. Yeah? Or then will naturally practice, right? They don't need to be told to practice anymore. They will naturally practice to continue to become arahantship. Yeah?
Is there a reason why you prefer to translate yatha bhutam with truly instead of in accordance with God?
So thank you. Yeah, good question. So yatha bhuta is, literally yatha means as or in accordance with. Bhuta is real or true. Yeah. The problem there is that unless you handle that word carefully, it can start to have essentialist connotations. Yeah? If you say things as they are, it kind of implies that there's a real true state that things are in. Right? Now there's actually a sutta that discusses this, as usually is a sutta that discusses this, and that's in the Nidana Samyutta. And it talks about that phrasing of idang bhutang, like what this has come to be. This thing is, this thing bhuta. Actually, bhuta is a past participle. Okay? It doesn't mean an eternal state of things. It means how things have come to be conditioned in this state. Yeah? So it's how these things are part of a process. Yeah? So you're understanding, in other words, really, actually what it really means is you're understanding dependent origination. Yeah, and understanding the process and the conditionality of these things. So if you say, then that's kind of gets cumbersome, doesn't it? If you translate so as to know principles in accordance with the process of conditioning in which they have become, something like that. So that's kind of a philosophically pregnant interpretation, right? Which is valid in a lot of doctrinal contexts, right? But yatha bhuta is also used in an idiomatic way, as a kind of emphatic term, in the same sense as we would say to know something truly. Yeah? So to truly know it. And so I've sort of chosen to go down that line of giving it a more sort of colloquial, sort of a slightly softer translation, and then hopefully the meaning will come through in the context. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Good question, though. Where are we now? Okay, so finally, those mendicants who are perfected, who are arahants, so we could translate that as who are worthy, the literal meaning of arahant, but I've translated arahant as perfected, who have ended their defilements, completed the spiritual journey. That means that they've completed all of the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. They've done what had to be done. Oh, hitabhara, put down the burden. The burden of the five khandhas, achieve their own goal. Anupatta sadatta. Utterly ended the fetters of rebirth and are rightly freed through enlightenment. Sambadanya vimutta. So they also meditate in the same way. Okay? But they meditate kayena visangyutta, detached from the body. Yeah? So they're not meditating in order to know it and see it. They're not meditating in order to fully understand it. They're meditating detached. They're not trying to get anything. They've already got it, or got rid of it, as the case may be. Okay? Are we good? So this is the, clearly the focus of this teaching is on the teaching of those who are junior, and one of the things that it's showing us is that in Buddhist meditation we basically keep doing the same practices, the same practices of watching your breath, being mindful, which we do when the first time when we show up to meditate and we first learn to practice, and they're the same things that we're doing even if you become an arahant. Your perspective on it and the purpose of it may be different, but the practice itself is the same. And of course this reflects also the fact that in the tradition it says that the Buddha's normal meditation was mindfulness of breathing. Okay?
So you want to be with
Mindfulness of breathing was the Buddha's normal meditation. Yeah. All right? Oh, why don't we do some? Okay, let's do some mindfulness of breathing meditation. Right, so let's continue by turning to the Satipatthana Sutta and looking at the specific meditations that are taught here. And I'll skip over the introductory portions, and for this session I'm going to focus primarily on the kinds of body contemplation. Begins with breath meditation, and in the Satipatthana Sutta itself we find the first four steps of Anapanasati, otherwise known as the first tetrad of Anapanasati. Elsewhere in the suttas, it makes it clear that, in fact, all of Anapanasati is the same thing as Satipatthana. Again, just one aspect or one way of practicing Satipatthana, and the remainder of the Satipatthana, of the mindfulness of breathing practices correlate with the remaining of the four Satipatthanas. So in fact the 16 steps of Anapanasati correspond with the four kinds of Satipatthana. But in the Satipatthana Sutta itself only have the first four steps of Anapanasati. Let us have a look at that. When breathing, dighang va asasanto dighang asasamiti pajanati. When breathing in heavily, they know I'm breathing in heavily. When breathing out heavily, they know I'm breathing out heavily. When breathing in lightly, they know I'm breathing in lightly. When breathing out lightly, they know I'm breathing out lightly. They practice breathing in, experiencing the whole body. They practice breathing in, practice breathing out, experiencing the whole body. They practice breathing in, stilling the body's motion. They practice breathing out, stilling the body's motion. So again, here just a few words on my translation choices. Literally the first two are breathing in long and breathing in short. But the idioms of describing breath as long and short are not really used in English. So we don't really describe breath as being long or short. We usually describe it as being heavy or light. So I've translated it in accordance with the English idiom, which causes a problem, and I'm aware of that, and so it causes me sleepless nights. Well, not quite sleepless nights, but none of these things are ever perfect. They practice breathing in, experiencing the whole body. So basically, these first four steps are really just describing the ordinary process of breathing meditation that all of you will have experienced many times when you're practicing. When you first begin to meditate, then your bodily energies are active. There's tension in your body, tension in your mind. Maybe your body's a little bit exhausted or tired or whatever. And so for all of those reasons, then you need more oxygen. Your brain also is thinking. Ding, 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 ding. Your CPU is running hot, and it takes energy, and actually a lot, right? The brain uses a lot of oxygen. So when you're thinking a lot, then you need to breathe to supply the fuel for all of that activity that's going on in your body and mind. So as you sit down to meditate, you become aware of that breathing. Okay. Gradually it settles down, and you feel, the breathing is becoming shorter, it's becoming lighter, it's becoming more gentle. And this is another way you could describe this. You could say when breathing in roughly and breathing in gently. That's another way. Anyway. And you can feel that, and that change comes. And that change you can experience in your breath, but it's not just in your breath, because it actually is reflected right through your whole body. And you feel every aspect of your body feels like that. And your mind. Your emotions become calmer, your thoughts become calmer. And if you have some nice samadhi, or at least just some nice attention and focus, then it doesn't take too long for that to happen. usually just after a few minutes you can sit and meditate, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and you can feel, already feel a lot calmer than I was before. So far at the beginning, it's just a very ordinary meditation, and this is one of the benefits that you can get just from a short sitting. And you can already feel that the energies in the body and the tensions in the body and the mind are starting to settle and starting to ease. Then it moves on. The next one, they practice breathing and experiencing the whole body. Sabba kaya patisangvedi. So this one is a slightly controversial translation or controversial phrase. Sometimes the body is literally sabbakaya means the whole body. So I've chosen to translate this one literally, and you can understand it as meaning the whole physical body. But also there are many teachers who say what it means is the whole body of the breath. Again, the breath is one of the bodies in the body, or an aspect of the body. So you practice breathing in, experiencing the whole of the breath. And I personally, I don't have strong opinions on this one actually. I know that will shock you, but there are some things on which I do not have strong opinions. And actually I think either way of translating it is fine, and either way of practicing is probably fine. So maybe it was left ambiguous for a reason. But either way, I mean, the reality is, I mean, the fact is, the experience is that you do have a more holistic understanding. Yeah? Your breath is becoming softer, your awareness. See, what's happening before, right, is that your awareness is smaller, you know? And you're sort of trying to be aware of the breath and that kind of thing. But as you go on, your awareness relaxes and actually starts to grow. So this is pointing to this wholeness and to this expansiveness of awareness. And we know that in so many of the Buddha's teachings on meditation, he talked about this expansiveness of awareness. You know, consider the practice of the Brahma Viharas, for example. Yeah, Appamano, yeah, Vipulang, yeah, the mind which is vast, abundant, exalted. Yeah, Mahaggatang Chittang. And in Satipatthana itself, later on, we'll find all these descriptions of the mind. So this mind which is becoming big. And again, this is a normal experience, which each one of you will have experienced in meditation. That when you begin the meditation, your mind is relatively narrow, relatively closed, you know. You can feel it, right? It feels a bit tight, it feels a bit constricted. And it's not just the feel of the mind itself, but it's also the things that the mind cooks up. The kinds of things that you think about, the kinds of things that you worry about and obsess about, they tend to be a bit small and narrow, you know, and you're maybe kind of annoyed at some small little slight that somebody did to you or some kind of thing, and then you get to this mind is very small. And as you meditate, the mind starts to become bigger. It's nice. Yeah? And the breath just isn't this kind of small, creaky thing anymore, yeah? But the breath becomes something which is big and expansive. And the mind is starting to become big and expansive. You're starting to relax. So this is really what this idea of Sabbakaya is talking about. You're moving towards this more kind of holistic, more expansive kind of consciousness. And the next step is stilling the body's motion. Yeah? Pasambhayang kaya sankarang. And again, we can translate kaya sankara in a number of different ways here. The body's activities, yes, it could be. The body's energies, perhaps, right? I've translated the body's motion in terms of like the breath stilling, becoming almost, can be disappearing. But also you can feel that through your whole body as well, like you feel like your body is becoming very still. And at that point in your meditation, you start to feel like there's a solidity, like you're just sitting there and it's just like, And all of those little kind of movements and energies through your body, all of those little tensions and things like that, they start to go away. And you feel like this, almost like this strength that comes, like this, almost like you're like like this immovability. And the breath becomes very, very quiet. So it's at this point, right? So as we're going through, each stage is becoming a little bit more subtle. Right? The first stage, I know a heavy breath or a long breath. That's easy. Anyone can do that. Yeah. And through light, knowing the light breath, okay, takes a bit of time and patience, but not too much. Then experiencing that whole body. Yeah. Now we're starting to get somewhere a bit deeper. Yeah. We're starting to change the nature of our consciousness. And then stilling the body's motion. Now we're starting to get close. We're starting to get close to the good stuff. And when you feel that mind starting to become very still, you can actually feel like your breath has disappeared altogether. Yeah? Not at all uncommon. Has anybody experienced that in their meditation? They feel like their breath is gone. Anyone experienced that? Yeah, quite a few people have experienced it, yeah. And sometimes you can almost panic. You're like, oh my God, my breath is gone. And this fear comes up. Why is that fear there? Why is that fear there? Yeah? Because you don't want to die. You're afraid that you're going to die because your breath is your life. Yeah? Now this is interesting because what this is doing, right? When we're reaching this stage, it's starting to reveal the underlying psychological and emotional mechanism that makes anapanasati work. Why is it that watching your breath works? Why does it make you feel peaceful? Right? Because breath is life. Your breath is your life. And as long as your breath is there, it's telling you you're still alive. I'm still here, I'm still here. And from the moment that you're born until the moment that you die, your breath is there with you all the time, telling you again and again, you're still here, you're still alive. Yeah, you're still alive. It's like a notification on an app that's just reminding you, but a welcome one, not an annoying one. That's telling you you're alive. Maybe that would be a good idea for an app. Actually, we could make an app that sends a message every 5 seconds saying you're still alive. You're still alive. Right? But it's just there in the background. We don't notice it, yeah? You don't notice it until it's not there. And when it's not there, you really notice it. Yeah? And you start to panic and that fear of death comes. Yeah? So this is why the breath is so soothing, because you're paying attention to that and it's comforting you. Yes, it's okay, you're still here. Yes, it's okay, you're still alive. And that's why fear has this uplifting energy to it. So this is why when I'm talking about breath meditation, I always try to emphasize to let the breath calm you down. Yeah? It's not about you calming yourself down. It's not you don't calm yourself down. It's just nature calms you down. And consider the origins of meditation. And I skipped over this passage, but I shouldn't have. Let's go back to the passage talking about just how you begin meditation. Very fundamental practice, and one that, as I mentioned before, in the Upanishads and the pre-Buddhist texts, we find discussions that sound like they are contemplative. They sound like they're the kinds of discussions that a meditator would have, but we don't find a description of how to actually go about meditation. Right? How do you actually do the practice? And so this is the most standard passage in the suttas that talks about how to actually do this. When a mendicant gone to a wilderness or the root of a tree or an empty hut, aranyagato. yeah, the forest or the wilderness. So I'll just again give my commentary on my translation here. Why I've chosen aranya to translate as wilderness. Often it's translated as forest, right? So they translate like an aranyavasa as a forest monastery. But actually in the suttas, aranya really means a place where there's no human habitation. So a desert is an aranya. Yeah, anywhere that there's no humans living is aranya. So I've translated as wilderness rather than forest. There are other words for forest like vana and so on. Rukkamulagato, to the root of a tree. Yeah. And yesterday we were at the root of the Bodhi tree in the Kalaniya Mahavihara. My goodness, right? Very, very nice place to meditate. Yeah, I think the Buddha had very good taste in meditation trees. And, you can just feel that kind of, if you're in the forest, like it's hot, right? In northern India, most of the time it's pretty hot. And then underneath the tree, that expansive shade, it's a nice, lovely, cool place to sit. So nice, yeah? And when you go under there, then you already felt that feeling of calmness. So rukkamulagato va sunyagaragato, so an empty hut. So an empty hut basically is anywhere that you can find that is like a kuti or a room or any kind of place, a dhamma hall, that you can find that's going to be empty. Just as an interesting point in linguistic history, agara, translated as hut here, is actually the same root as the English word garage. So this means going to the empty garage to meditate, and sometimes that's the only place you've got where you can find a bit of peace and quiet. So this is going to the empty garage. Anyway, so they sit down cross-legged, palankang abhujitva, set the body straight, ujjunkayang panidhaya. So again, these are very specific instructions, right? Elsewhere, of course, we have a longer list of places to meditate. We have the heap of straw, or the hillside cave, and various other places. So as long as we can meditate somewhere where it's going to be secluded and quiet is the idea. Cross-legged sets the body, and that's okay, so sits down cross-legged, so normally, of course, then this means sitting in the cross-legged posture according to what is comfortable for you. If you're not comfortable sitting cross-legged, then sit in a chair, and even in the Visuddhimagga, for example, the instructions on the contemplation of the earth kasina begins with sitting on a low stool. So clearly even meditating on a chair or a stool was done in the ancient times as well. Ujung kayang, it's not as good, I have to admit. I sit on a chair to meditate because my knees aren't good, but you can sit for a while on the floor, but it's always nicer. Anyway. Set your body straight. All right. So don't be too rigid in your body, but make sure that you have that sense of being upright. There's a certain kind of dignity to it, so don't let your body become too sloppy when you're meditating. And then focus your mindfulness right there. Now this is a somewhat different translation than we normally find, so let me just go through the terms here. Parimukhang sating upartapetwa. First thing to notice is that sating upartapetwa is the resolution of the compound satipatthana. All right, so this basically sating upartapetwa means doing satipatthana. Right? It's just a verbal resolution of the compound. So it's giving us a good idea of what satipatthana means. And what it shows us is here, as is the normal usage in the suttas, is basically it means do meditation. Sating upartapetva means start to meditate. Yeah? You're sitting down and then you're focusing your awareness, beginning your meditation. And so this is why I've translated Satipatthana as the kinds of mindfulness meditation. Yeah, so generally I translate Satipatthana as mindfulness meditation because that's the main meaning. And yes, more literally you could translate it as the establishment of mindfulness or something like that. That's a more literal translation. But as always, I try to translate it in a way that brings out the core basic meaning as much as possible. So you begin to meditate, focusing in mindfulness, and the difficult phrase here is parimukkhang. And unfortunately, parimukkhang does not have a explanation in the early texts. It is used only in one other context in Pali, and that's in the Vinaya, where it talks about some monks who were growing their beards. So if you're growing your beard, parimukkhang, around your mouth, then no, you shouldn't do that. You should have a shave. Yeah? So parimukkhang is that sense of, in that literal physical sense, it means around your mouth. Unfortunately, the word mukha has a very, very wide variety of meanings in Pali. It means mouth, it means face, it means presence, it means entry, it means cause. Oh my goodness, so many different meanings. And so it's a bit hard to work out exactly what it does mean here. I think it's unlikely that the original meaning was about a physical location. And the reason for that is because it does not just occur in the context of breath meditation. If this only occurred in the context of breath meditation, yes, you could say it means focusing on your nose tip or something like that, not a problem. But actually it occurs when abandoning the 5 hindrances, when developing the 4 Brahma Viharas. It's a general instruction for meditation. So I'm not really sure that it means those things. Now, in Sanskrit, this phrase is sometimes found as pratimukkhang rather than parimukkhang. Slight variant reading, pratimukkhang. And pratimukkhang has one of the meanings of pratimukkhang is presence. Yeah? Presence. So presence of mindfulness. In other words, focuses their mindfulness right there. Actually, it's a common idiom in Pali that that these kinds of phrases are presented in that they're repeated. That you find basically the same idea is expressed with synonyms. It's very common, right? So you have a phrase like, say, viryang arabati, one rouses up energy, or sadhang adhimuchati, one decides on faith. Actually, adhimuchati and sadha mean the same thing, but it's just by reinforcement. So I think actually parimukkhang really here means more or less the same thing as mindfulness, actually. I think it's just reinforcing it. So it's basically saying that you're being present, that you're being mindful. So this is why I'm saying you focus your mindfulness right there. But like I say, it's a bit of a tricky one. The earliest commentary to this is in the Abhidhamma Vibhanga, and there it says nasikage, on the tip of the nose. So look, if somebody wants to translate it in that way, I think it's a very reasonable translation. But like I said, I suspect that in the earliest time, perhaps it didn't have a spatial meaning. Then the next, more important than that, okay, is the next line, which then talks about what you're doing, right? So you're focusing your mindfulness right there, but what does that mean? The next line is telling you what that means. So sato va asasati, sato va pasasati. Just mindful, they breathe in, mindful, they breathe out. Mindful, they breathe in, mindful, they breathe out. And so this is the fundamental instruction and description of breath meditation. Now, one of the things which is very nice, and it took me years to kind of notice this, is that that mindfulness in here is acting as an adverb. So mindfulness is describing how you are breathing. the manner of one who is breathing. Yeah? Mindfully breathing in, mindfully breathing out. Yeah? And so it has that very, very kind of gentle sense. You're actually just doing that same thing that you were already doing. Yeah? Like you're walking. I'm walking. I can be walking, my mind's distracted everywhere, but I can also be walking mindfully. Yeah? I'm just walking. It doesn't change, but it's how you do it. It's what the state of mind you bring to it. Mindful they breathe in, mindful they breathe out. And so notice what it doesn't do is it doesn't focus on that effortful work that the meditator is doing. So it doesn't say a meditator concentrates on the breath, the meditator focuses on the breath, the meditator tries to be aware of the breath. So all this kind of language, which is very common in modern meditation teachings, we don't find this in the suttas. Mindful breathe in, mindful breathe out. It's just that natural process. And all we're doing is just bringing that gentle touch of mindfulness to that process. Yeah? And think about it like you are watching a bird in nature. Yeah? You go into the forest, you see a little bird on the tree. So cute. So sweet. Yeah? Or a little animal in the forest. And what do you want to do? Oh, very quiet. You just watch. Yeah? Not making a fuss, not doing too much. And the less you can do, yeah? The less you can do, the more you can be aware. Yeah? Rather than interfering with it. So you just try to keep that awareness there. And so you have that constancy. Remember, we describe this also as anupassi, right? The continuing observation, right? The ongoing flow of observation. Yeah? So very gentle. Yeah? Just watching very gently without scaring it off. Your mind is very gentle, you'll scare it off. Just watching very gently. And so this is the foundation of the mindfulness of breathing. Any questions? Adrian, yeah. Okay. Yep.
Is that that body scanning technique? Is that a kind of body scanning?
Not really, no. Yeah, I mean that's being aware of the sensations in your body. Yeah, Parimukkhang I think is more general. It's not a specific kind of meditation. Yeah. Please.
Practice breathing and stilling the body's emotion. Could that be construed as practicing breathing and using the breath in an instrumental sense to accomplish the goal?
I practice breathing and stilling the body's motion. I don't know. Do you think so?
I've always wondered.
Yeah. Asambayang kaya sankara. I mean, look. Yes, could it be? Yes. Yeah. Is that the intention? No. That's not the intention of the passage. No. Yeah. It's talking about like a sort of grammatically it has this sense of kind of an ongoing process. While it's like I shall breathe while the body is becoming still. Yeah. Yes.
If you interpret the experience of the whole body as a physical and breath flow, you can describe that stage a bit more, breathing experience of the whole body.
Well, if you practice it that way, then you have that kind of expanded awareness. So you have that awareness of your whole body sitting there, and then you feel your whole body breathing. Yeah, and you can actually do this. This is the thing, right? This is why I'm not really hung up on this distinction, because you really can feel that. Actually, you can feel the energy of the breath and the rhythm of that breath going through your whole body. Yeah. So, if you look on our forum, you find that one of our friends on the forum has just done something very cool, and this is this little chart of the suttas. And all suttas are there, pretty much. And they're all in one thing, and you can even like zoom around and go in. Yes. And you can even click them. Where do you click them? You can click here. Yes, this will tell you where to go, and then you can go to the thing. Nice, right? So this is good. If you're bored with the usual way of looking at suttas, then you can play around with this. And you can look at suttas upside down, all kinds of things. Could be helpful if your phone's upside down and you can't be bothered turning it the right way up, then you could just do that. It's easy. Anyway, so where were we? Back in sensible land. Okay. That's right. Righty-ho. So we were looking at the Satipatthana Sutta, and that's right, yes. So are there any further questions on Anapanasati before we proceed? Yes, Tom. Yes. Convergence, ekayana. Ekayana, the place all things come together at one. We talked about it in the Upanishad. Remember? I talked about it for like half an hour in the Upanishads and then again this morning. So let me talk about it again, okay? So ekayano ayang bhikkhave. Ekayana is the word from the Upanishads. It means the place where all things come together as one. Yeah? In other words, the place of convergence, yeah? So I've translated it as ekayano ayang bhikkhave, the path to convergence, the path where all things come together as one, meaning that the mindfulness meditation is the path to samadhi. Right? Are we good? We're good? You sure? This is the time to ask? Or the future. Also, you can ask again. That's fine. Good. Okay. Any other questions?
The reference to the carpenter and the carpenter.
Right.
The friend is anything particular because of the friend is, it might sound mind, but why bring it?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so...
Junior and again, reference to like that. Just observe.
Yeah, no, just a kind of simile. I mean, I think it's that kind of, when you're cutting and you have that sort of careful, constant attention, yeah? And always the Buddha was observing simple things around him, and you see a Dhamma meaning in those simple things. Yeah, I mean, there really is something beautiful when you see a craftsman who is really skilled and is doing their craft, and they get into that flow.
No reference to the apprentice.
To the apprentice. Yeah, this is just really a convention. Yeah, they always talk about that, yeah. Antevasi. All right, so then we go on to the passage at the end. So this is like the refrain, which follows all of the different meditations in the Satipatthana Sutta. And so here, the history of this refrain is a bit kind of complicated, but basically these are passages which mostly are found elsewhere in the context of Satipatthana. So meditating internally and externally, both internally and externally, this one is very common. We find this all the time. Meditate observing the body as liable to originate, liable to vanish, and liable to both originate and vanish. Samudaya dhammanupassi vaikayasming viharati. Vaya dhammanupassi vaikayasming viharati. Samudaya vaya dhammanupassi vaikayasming viharati. So this is found occasionally elsewhere. So this is specifically, as I was saying before, this is the vipassana portion of it. And so this is where it's specifically looking at impermanence, conditionality, and so on. I think we find this passage in one place in the Satipatthana Samyutta. Now, in terms of the internally and externally, this is meant in quite a literal way, especially when it comes to the body. So the most obvious example of this would be the contemplation of the dead body, where you're looking inside yourself. This body too is like that body too is like this body. Yeah? So when you're contemplating your body, internally, contemplating the dead body externally, and contemplating that actually this body and that body are just the same, then this is ajata bahidha, right? Contemplating internally, externally. Yeah? So you're unifying or dissolving that difference between them. So the idea of contemplating internally and externally is a kind of interesting one, especially when it comes to the mental factors. But there are a couple of places in the suttas that show that what it really means is talking about psychic powers, actually. Contemplating minds externally means reading other people's minds. So that's that. Now this last frame here, atikayoti vapanasa satipachupatita hoti avadeva jnanamataya pratisatimataya anisito cha viharati na chakinchi loke upadiyati. This is a very beautiful passage and a very powerful passage, but also one which is somewhat enigmatic. And it's also a passage which is a bit difficult to trace elsewhere, so it's quite unique to the Satipatthana Sutta. So mindfulness is established that the body exists, atikayoti, so that the body is here or that the body is present, to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness. So this is reinforcing that when we are doing these practices, that they have a purpose, right? So we're practicing for something. We're establishing for realization and for the truth. Jnana mattaya, patisati mattaya. So in this case, I think that the jnana matta and the matta suffix here, I think, means sufficient, to the extent necessary. So I translate it as the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness. And then the last part, anisito cha viharati, one is independent, nacha kinchi loke upadiyati. I mean, this sounds like the arahant, right? I mean, it sounds like somebody who has meditated through this whole process and reached the end of the path. And if you're really independent and not grasping, then you're the arahant. And so I suppose for a meditator that this is something to aspire to, right? So we try to meditate being as independent and ungrasping as we can. So this is how a mendicant meditates, by observing an aspect of the body. All right. Let's have a look at some of the other meditations. Furthermore, when a mendicant is walking, they know I am walking. When standing, they know I am standing. When sitting, they know I am sitting. And when lying down, they know I am lying down. Whatever posture their body is in, they know it. And so they meditate observing an aspect of the body internally and externally, and so on as before. Now, this is one of those meditation practices which is so simple that when you first see it, you think you're walking, you know you're walking, and you're standing, you know I'm standing, and you're like, obviously. But then you start to think about it, and you realize how much of the time do you really know these things? And actually most of the time you don't. And that's kind of disturbing, right? Because we spend most of our time doing things and we don't know what we're doing when we're doing it. That's kind of a worry, isn't it? So, are you aware that you're sitting now? Well, you are now because I mentioned it, right? But before I mentioned it, were you? Oh, maybe a bit, maybe not, yeah? So this is that mindfulness, to be aware of those postures. Yeah? Now, this is why, one of the reasons why we try to simplify our lives, right? The more distractions you have, the more things that are going on, then the harder it is to maintain awareness of all of these things. When you're on retreat, and here we're not doing an intensive meditation retreat, but still, you have time. You don't have to catch any buses, and you can take your time going from one place to another. Be mindful. It's always good to be mindful when you're changing postures. So when you get up from your seat, to remind yourself, oh, now I'm standing up. Yeah, stand up. When you start to walk, remind yourself, I'm starting to walk. Yeah, and try to keep that mindfulness on that walking. Now again, that mindfulness that we do when we're doing these things is very gentle, okay? It doesn't mean that we have to do like a specific practice, right? I mean, we can do, right? You can do this as a walking meditation practice where you're just practicing mindfulness. Yes, you can do that. And you can do like the practice where you're like lifting, very carefully lifting the sole of your feet, very carefully lifting, very carefully moving the foot along, very carefully putting the foot down again. And so you can break it down and slow it down and do that as a special walking meditation practice. But it doesn't have to be like that. We can be more mindful no matter what we're doing. And so here we have the opportunity to slow down, to be a bit more mindful, and to keep checking back to where you are, where your body is, and what it is that you're doing. Any questions on this practice? Yes, Anne. Is the posture, yeah. Yeah. But notice how it's phrased. It's phrased as an action, right? Gacchanto va gacchami. I am walking. Yeah? So it's not a thing. It's something that you're doing. Yeah, a bit like the breathing, right? So breathing is not a thing. Breathing is something that you're doing. Yep. Okay. Well, I don't... Yeah. I don't think it's meant to be. It's meant to be observing the postures, right? But I understand what you're saying. But yeah, when doing observing those postures, just like with the breath meditation, it's about observation, right? So not about trying to control things. And if you tried to control your postures, you'd probably fall over, right? It's too much. It's weird, isn't it? Yeah, we do these. We don't really know how we do it. Like, how do you actually walk? Like, what muscles do you use and stuff? I don't know. You just start here and go to there. Yeah. So, yeah, this is one of the tendencies, is that when we bring focus to things, that we always bring our sense of self along with that. Our mind is an ego-making machine. It's there to make us, to build our sense of self, to form us, to form I. Now this is the thing in meditation, right? We always know, okay, we contemplate not self, we let go of our sense of self, let go of our sense of attachment, let go of our sense of identity. Let go of all of those things, right? But remember, why is it that we can let go of these things? Like, when that sense of self is there, yeah, why is that sense of self there? Where is it coming from? Actually, that sense of self doesn't just happen. I mean, we get so used to it, we think that it's natural, we think that it has to be there. I mean, in a sense, yes, it is natural, it is how we are. But it's something that we construct. We have to put energy into it. Yeah, this is the ahankara. I'm making my I. Yeah? Every time that we think, we are making our identity. Yeah? Every time we talk, usually or often, we are building our sense of identity. Whenever we remember things, yeah, you remember something. Oh, I'm the one who remembered that. I was there. This is what I did. Yeah? Whenever we perceive something, you look around the room, I'm seeing the world from my perspective. Yeah? I'm building up my sense of self. Everything that I'm doing and so on is building up my sense of self. Why? Because that sense of self is just a construct. Actually, it's not real. It's just a construct. And if we stop building it up, it will start to fall apart. And so this is what's happening when we start to meditate. Yeah? Just be natural, just be normal with things. Just walk. And all of that I-making and mind-making will naturally start to fall away. Yeah? Naturally start to fall away. We're not building up that sense of self as we were before. Unless, of course, we use wrong thought. Okay? So if we start to think, I'm such a good meditator, look at me, I've done so many hours of meditation today, I'm good, right? So those sorts of conceit can come in, we get attached to that. But this is just like one of those hazards along the path. Yeah? It's not such a big problem actually, as long as we're aware of it. But we do these things little bit by little bit, and just by bringing awareness into the present, then that sense of self is starting to crumble. Yeah? Or rather than saying, one way of looking at it is to say, rather than saying it's starting to crumble, another way of looking at it would be to say that it's starting to become unnecessary. Yeah? Because we build that sense of self because of our sense of fear. We're afraid that we're going to disappear. We're afraid we're going to become nothing. We're afraid that we're meaningless. And so we build up that sense of ego to sort of protect us. But actually, if we could just be peaceful, easy. Yeah, we don't need that sense of ego to puff us up all the time. All right, let's have a look at the next meditation exercise, situational awareness. And let's have a bit of a Google for this one. Let's see what Google, or more appropriately, DuckDuckGo, says about situational awareness. What is situational awareness? According to Wikipedia, situational awareness is the perception of environmental elements and events with respect to time or space, the comprehension of their meaning, and the projection of their future status. Situational awareness has been recognized as a critical yet often elusive foundation for successful decision-making across a broad range of situations, many of which involve the protection of life and property, including law enforcement, aviation, air traffic control, ship navigation, healthcare, emergency response, military command and control operations, so on and so forth. Lacking in situational awareness has been identified as one of the primary factors in accidents attributed to human error. Okay, so the formal definition of situational awareness is broken down into 3 segments. Perception of the elements in the environment. Okay, so knowing what's around you. Comprehension of the situation. Yeah. What are you actually doing? So, and projection of future status. So a good example of that might be, say, crossing a road. Yeah? Situational awareness. You need sampajanya to cross the road. Number one, elements in the environment. Cars coming and going, right? Yeah, so you need to be aware of those things. Look left and right, get your situational awareness. But you also need the comprehension, right? Because you need to know, well, these cars are driving on the road, these cars are parked, right? And you need to know this is where the right light is red and this is when the light is green. And so this is your comprehension. You need to have that understanding. And you also need to have a projection of future status. That if I step on the road there, then that car will be there and it will hit me. Yeah? So these are all aspects of the formal definition of situational awareness as it's understood in psychology. And so this is a fairly new psychological term and first became publicized in the 1980s and became better known later on. Originally from observation of fighter pilots in wartime because they found that when they trained fighter pilots, that some would, when they had allowed, but they wanted to know what is it that makes a good fighter pilot? Why is it that some come home and some don't? Yeah, and when you've allowed for talent and training and machinery and all of those other things, they found that there was something left over, something they weren't accounting for. And this they put down to situational awareness, that some people just have a better awareness of what's going around them, understanding of what that means, and projection of the future status. And these things are actually very, very similar to what the Buddha was talking about when he's talking about sampajanya. Yeah? It's not exactly identical, but it's actually very similar. So this is why I translate it as situational awareness. Older translations use clear comprehension or clear awareness or something like that, which are perfectly fine translations, but they're a little bit vague. I think situational awareness is more psychologically precise. So this refers to, so let's see how the Buddha is describing it here. Furthermore, a mendicant acts with situational awareness when going out and coming back, when looking ahead and looking aside, when bending and extending the limbs, when bearing the outer robe, the bowl, actually the outer robe I don't have, the sangati, the, should I have an outer robe? I thought I'd change that to cloak. Sorry, another translation thing I have to check. Pardon me. Okay, the outer robe, the bowl and the robes, when eating, drinking, chewing and tasting, when urinating and defecating, when walking, standing, sitting, sleeping, waking, speaking and keeping silent, one acts with situational awareness. All right? So obviously these are talking about the activities that one is doing through the day. And it's specifically not for like particular meditation practices, right? This is just a general awareness. However, the first part of it implicitly is really talking about going for alms round. We can see that from a number of other passages. I mean, obviously it's meant to be applied more generally, but when it's describing the bhikkhu's behavior in this way, this is what he's talking about, right? You're in the monastery, everything's fine, but then you're going to go for alms round, and you're going to walk through the village, and everything's much more exciting and interesting in the village, so you have to prepare yourself by going to go more mindfully. So begin walking back, now carrying your bowl, and so on and so forth, and then coming back, having the meal, going to the toilet, and all of the actions that you're doing during the day. So basically everything that's more or less apart from meditation. So in all of these things, then we act with situational awareness. And as we saw with the Wikipedia article on situational awareness, so part of that means understanding the environment, understanding your context. Right? It means also having a comprehension of what is going on in that context. It means having an understanding of your purpose, like what are you there for? Yeah, and it means having a clear understanding that of the place that this has, like the suitability of your actions in that particular context. Yeah? So again, for a monk, if I was to go to the pub and ask for a beer, then maybe I could walk into the pub very mindfully. I could place one foot in front of the other very mindfully, and I could very mindfully say to the bartender, "I'll have a beer, thanks." And I could be very aware of everything that I'm doing. I know one foot, I know the other foot, I know what I'm doing, but it still wouldn't be sampajanya, because I shouldn't be going to a bar and asking for beer. So this is understanding the purpose. So it's this kind of broad-based understanding of where you are and what you're doing. And in this way, it gives like a contrast, or not a contrast, but it gives a complement to the much more specific and specialized kind of awareness that we develop through meditation. So when we're in meditation, we're aware of the breath and just that. Just that one thing. Just aware of that, just aware of that, just aware of that. So now we're being much more aware of all of those things going on around us.
For example, say you're doing walking meditation,
Yes.
you tend to focus less on the outside noise of the birds and
That would be part of your sampajanya, right? So yes, if you're going for a walk, then you're aware, yes. But if you're going for walking meditation, then yes, it's more refined. Yep. So this is one of the things that, I'll come to a minute short, but it's one of the things that's an important skill for when you're moving in and out of different contexts, like especially if you're on a retreat, or you have that time when you're much more focused and you're meditating and you develop your awareness in a certain way. You can't just do the same thing when you come out of retreat and you go back home, because the context is different. So your sampajanya needs to be there. And when I do intensive meditation retreats, then when we finish, I usually warn people before they're going home, be careful when you're driving. Because they're in this different space, and you have to adjust. And it takes a bit of time, and you have to sort of do it consciously. Okay? We good? All right. Now, focusing on the repulsive, the yucky things. Furthermore, a mendicant examines their own body up from the soles of the feet and down from the tips of the hairs, wrapped in skin and full of many kinds of filth. Dear, oh dear. The first time I ever heard about this meditation, I was in the monastery in northern Thailand, and there was a monk there, and his English wasn't very good. And I just started to meditate. I didn't know anything. And this monk was just like, "Oh yes, the body very ugly, very nasty." And I'm like, "Speak for yourself, mate. Mine's all right." I didn't actually say that, but that's what I thought. So, in this body, there is head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, diaphragm, spleen, lungs, intestines, mesentery, undigested food, feces, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, saliva, snot, synovial fluid, urine. Yuck, right? Imagine somebody was just to get a bag of all of that stuff and just say, plonk it at your foot. You'd be like, yeah. But that's like literally what we are. It's just a bag full of all of that stuff. It's weird, isn't it? So weird. It's like freaky. It's like I'm walking around with all this stuff inside me. Like if it was on the table, I'd be like, ew. But yeah, Scott.
Was there a comprehensive understanding of anatomy, physiology at the time?
Well, it wasn't too bad, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if this was sort of a deeper wisdom that was
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's generally understood that this is at least derived from the kind of the Ayurvedic knowledge at the time. I don't know that there are any detailed medical texts from so early, but certainly, I mean, obviously there was a lot of medical knowledge, and there are medical textbooks, Ayurvedic textbooks from later. I mean, to give an example of the medical practices at the time, in the Vinaya, the Buddha's main doctor was Jivaka, and he was a surgeon and a doctor who treated the Buddha when he was sick. And when he did his medical training, he completed his training with his mentor, and then his mentor gave him his final test, his medical exam, and he gave him a cart and told him to leave the city and drive around the city for the whole day, and then bring back in the cart everything that was not medicine. And he came back with an empty cart. He said, yes, you passed your exam. And so then he went, actually there are some things in Jivaka's story which would be really good for modern doctors to learn. Number one, when he treated people, he told them, don't pay me until you're cured. That's pretty good, isn't it? Right? I'll treat you if it doesn't work. Okay, I don't expect any payment. Yeah? Don't pay me till you're cured. And then, they actually describe some quite advanced procedures like brain surgery. Yeah? Cuts up a man and then removes like a tumor or something like that from the person's brain. So, yeah, there's definitely some, quite sophisticated medical knowledge at the time. Yes, what is there to say about the body parts? Okay, so this is this meditation on the parts of the body, which is taught for monastics. It's usually like the first 5 items are taught for novices when they ordain, Kesa, Loma, Naka, Danta, Tacho, and then we have to recite them in forward and reverse order on our ordination day of a novice ordination. And so this is given as a fundamental meditation. And one of the things about this meditation is that it is, why is it a meditation? Like, this is the weird thing about it. Like, why does paying attention to your liver actually make your mind free? Right? I mean, normally, if you pay attention to liver and pus and things like that, it doesn't actually make you feel peaceful. So, of course, the thing is that we have attachment to our body, and we care about it, we're concerned about it, we have lust and desire for it, and also for the bodies of others. And so that is one of the things that keeps us trapped. Now, when we pay attention to what these things are, then we tend to say, okay, it's just all of these things. And so we have these feelings of revulsion, these feelings of yuckiness. But those feelings of revulsion and yuckiness actually are just more attachment, actually. Why do we feel that it's yucky? Actually, it's just normal. We feel that it's yucky because I don't want to feel like my body has those yucky bits in it. It actually is just like inverted attachment. It's just an attachment, the other side of attachment. So when we pay attention to it, gradually let go, and you realize, actually it's just nature. And when you let go, because your mind loses its sense of attachment to your body, that's when it finds its peace and its freedom. So this is why these meditations actually can lead to samadhi. So if you want to practice these meditations, there are many different methods for practicing them. A lot of methods in the forest tradition, Ajahn Chah and others will talk about these practices a lot. But one way that you can do it is by you meditate, and then you can review the different parts of your body. So you imagine them in your mind and see if you can feel them and imagine them as clearly as you can. And so you recite the name of that thing, the head hair, until you can feel it as clearly as you can. And then you go through the different parts and you try to envisage each of those parts as clearly as you possibly can. Now, sometimes when you're doing that, you'll find that one or other of the body parts will become more clear to you. And let's say, for example, perhaps it's your bones. And when you come to the bones, you actually feel, oh yeah, I can see that really clearly. Yeah? So if that's the case, then you can stay with that. Stay with the bones and keep on meditating on that body part. Keep your mind with that, keep on exploring it. And then if you keep on doing that for long enough and the mind begins to let go, then eventually you may get some kind of nimitta. So you start to, that image of that body part, of that bone, will start to become more solid, more clear. And even it might start to shine. Right? And you actually sort of get a light coming off it. And again, what is that light? That light is not a real light. It's born of perception. That light is a sign. What is that sign saying? That sign is saying that the 5 hindrances are leaving your mind. That's what it is. It's the message that your mind gives you to tell you that the hindrances are on their way out. And you'll see that that part of the body starts to shine. And you can start to focus on that, and it becomes actually quite fascinating. See, this is one of the things with body parts. On the one hand, they're kind of icky, right? But they're also kind of quite fascinating, right? It's like, oh. And you sort of, when you see them, you kind of want to look. Yeah? It has actually that attractive power too. And so your mind is like drawn to it, and then gradually you can learn to let go. Now, typically when practicing this, most of the time people will use either the external body parts, or typically the skeleton is the most common one. I don't know anybody who's got a jhana on the basis of a snot nimitta. Maybe it's possible, I don't know, but I haven't I haven't heard about it personally. But in case that's your thing, maybe that's going to be a thing. But there's so many different ways that you can reflect on this, and you can do it by taking the different body parts apart. You can do it by like the internal external meditation, by seeing it inside yourself and seeing it inside others as well. And sometimes this will happen also spontaneously. So maybe if you're meditating and you're starting to see that nimitta and starting to see your skeleton very clearly, then you might just start to see that in others around you as well. And you just walk around, and like everybody around you is just a skeleton. It's weird. It's like really freaky. I mean, this has happened to me a little bit occasionally, but not very much. But I know some monks who've had that kind of experience. One monk told me he was on a bus, and then everyone around just sort of, he was doing a lot of this body contemplation, and then suddenly just everyone around him just turned into these lumps of meat. And he was just on this bus with all of these lumps of meat that thought they were people. Right? We are all lumps of meat who think we're people. So these are changes in perception. Changes in perception. So one sort of the stories that Ajahn Chah would tell was about how he or another monk, I think how he was practicing one time, and he was doing this practice of taking his body parts apart, and he was doing walking meditation. And as he was walking back and forth on his walking meditation path, mindfulness was very strong and so on. And then he found himself just sinking into the ground. So it's like he's sinking into the ground and up to his knees, and just keeps on walking. And then he gradually came back up to the ground, and then his body parts started breaking off and floating up into the air. And then he could like see them, and then they would be like hanging and draping off the trees. So it'd be like a liver hanging off the tree, or a pair of lungs hanging off the tree, or something like that. And so these are all perceptions. When we're deepening our meditation, our perception changes. The manner in which we see the world changes. So when these things happen to you in your meditation, don't get too worried about it. Or, also, don't get too excited about it. Actually, it's just perception. It's not such a big deal. Yeah? What matters is letting go. Yeah? So these things are all kind of signs. They're all the way that your body tells you these things. So we come on to the simile. So most of these have these very illustrative similes. It's as if there were a bag with openings at both ends filled with various kinds of grains, such as fine rice, wheat, mung beans, peas, sesame, and ordinary rice. And someone with good eyesight were to open it and examine the contents. These grains are fine rice, these are wheat, these are mung beans, these are peas, these are sesame, and these are ordinary rice. So interesting that in the suttas you have these lists of grains and things like that. Some of them we kind of know what they are. Sali is definitely rice. Vihi is definitely wheat. Mugga, mung beans. Yeah. Masa, some peas or some kind of beans. Tila, sesame. Tandula. Tandula I think is a bit unclear. I've translated it as ordinary rice, but probably some other kind of grain or some other variety of rice. Could even be something like millet or something like that maybe. So this is giving us an example of that kind of perception. Again, if you just have the bag filled with grains, then you don't know what's in it. So when we look at it closely, we can see it's made of all of these different parts. Any more questions on the parts of the body before we go on? Sorry? The brain. Oh, why is your brain missing? Oh, yeah, good question. So this is the early list, which has 31 parts of the body, and then later on they put the brain in as the 32nd part of the body. I don't know. Maybe the Buddha forgot about the brain. Sometimes they say the brain is included in bone marrow, but it does seem curious, right? I mean, it's a fairly significant part. Matalungang. Anyway. Yes, the brain is missing. One thing that I feel I should just address a little bit with this one, I mean, this practice has been sort of quite controversial in modern times, especially because like a lot of Buddhism in the West and so on is associated with the kind of the wellness movement and spirituality and things like that, and there's a lot of talk about body positivity. So everyone wants to have body positivity. And when you focus on this one, everyone's like, ew, no, this is terrible. How could you be so negative about things, right? And it's interesting because I've kind of followed this debate, and this is a debate you see in feminist circles quite a lot. But one of the things that's interesting about it is that conversation after like 20 or 30 years is now starting to change. And within feminist circles, people are starting to recognize that focusing excessively on body positivity actually can be very harmful. And, if you tell all the little girls, oh, you are beautiful, then, okay, you're trying to be nice to them, but at the same time, you're telling them that your worth is because of your beauty. And the reality is that human perception is as it is, and the reality is that we do see some people as more beautiful than others. And, like it or not, that's just how our perception works. And so you end up with sort of creating this kind of illusion where you're almost sort of forcing this perception on everybody. Oh, you're all beautiful, you're all like this, you're all like that. Whereas in fact, now the Buddha's point of view actually is about body acceptance and body neutrality. It's not that it's good or bad or beautiful or ugly. Actually, these are just all perceptions. And so we use this strategy of perception. Now, I wouldn't, if I was faced with, say a girl who had, say, anorexia, right? Then I would not prescribe this kind of problem, right? Because that's not what she would need, right? Because she already has a negative body image, and then she needs something else to be able to help her. So I would encourage her to develop some metta or some compassion or something like that. But on the other hand, for many people to be able to see this, if you focus too much on body positivity, then you don't have any way of overcoming the lust and the desire, which when it gets, I mean, it's not just a monastic thing. I mean, if it gets excessive, I mean, apart from anything else, how many politicians' careers have been lost from having affairs and sexual misconduct, right? It happens all the time. It's not just something for monastics. If we got all our politicians to do a bit more asubha meditation, then they'd maybe have a bit more self-control and wouldn't have so many scandals. But anyway, So we were looking this morning at the Satipatthana, and we were looking at the different meditation practices that are included within Satipatthana. Now, Satipatthana is a broad topic. I mean, essentially, the Satipatthana Sutta acts as a collection of many different kinds of meditation practices. And in a way, you could almost see the Satipatthana Sutta as the first meditation manual in the Buddhist tradition. Yeah? And you could trace a line from the Satipatthana Sutta to perhaps the Patisambhida Magga to the Vimutti Magga to the Visuddhi Magga. I mean, a somewhat tenuous line, admittedly, but that idea of like bringing all the main meditations together. And so for that reason, we can only really give a cursory discussion of many of these, but we'll just try to touch at least on them in some ways. Now, in some cases, the Satipatthana Sutta itself only deals with the meditations in a cursory manner, and such is the case with the practice of the elements. Furthermore, a mendicant examines their own body, whatever its placement or posture, according to the elements. In this body, there is the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the air element. It's as if a deft butcher, literally a cow butcher, Gogahataka, or a butcher's apprentice, were to kill a cow and sit down at the crossroads with the meat cut into portions. Now, elsewhere, the Buddha taught the meditation on the four elements in a lot of detail. Right? We have like the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta or the Mahahatipādopama Sutta, each of which are very long discourses in their own right that talk about the elements in a lot of detail. And if we included all of that in here as well, it would be very long. Yeah? So here we just deal with the elements in very briefly. So the earth element, solidity. Yeah. The water element, liquidity, so in this body. Right, so the earth element is inside the body, is like the bones and all the hard parts in the body. The water element, like the spittle and saliva and urine and so on, blood and things. The fire element, tejo dhatu, this is what Madhu studies. Yes, tejo dhatu. The element of burning everything up. Yeah? And the air element, the element of movement. Yeah? All the breaths inside the body. And so, yeah, like a somewhat gruesome simile to illustrate it. But again, this is getting the point that we can divide and slice up our body and then see these different aspects within the body. And once again, this can be done internally and externally as well as with the previous practices. Any questions on the Dhatu Manasikara? Contemplation of the elements. Ling.
Another class, when you were in Sydney, you were talking about 6, no, I don't know, maybe 5.
5 or 6?
You have consciousness.
That's correct, yeah. Yes, sometimes 5 elements with space added, and sometimes 6 with consciousness added as well. Yeah. But here it's focusing just on the main material elements, the 4. Yeah. Yeah, I do this meditation. Yeah, it's good. I don't do it like as one of my main meditations, but as a sort of supplementary practice. Then yeah, it's really good. Yeah. So the thing with the elements meditation is that for me it's more tactile compared to the parts of the body. So parts of the body you really kind of have to learn to visualize all those different parts. And my visual meditation isn't that good. Like I don't have a very good inner picturing thing. I'm sure there's a better word for that, okay? But my sense of, in a sense of visualization isn't very strong. I would be terrible as a Tibetan Buddhist, right? Doing all of those Buddhas with all of those details and things, I couldn't do that at all. But in terms of like feeling and experiencing the solidity and so on. That to me, that works really well. Yeah. Scott.
I've done Sona. Recently did an elements virtual retreat. I haven't watched the replay yet.
Okay.
But within that, there were also 4 primary colors
Okay.
incorporated. I don't remember white, blue, yellow,
Right.
red.
Right.
Are colors elemental or something that's just incorporated?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what he was doing with that retreat, but colours aren't generally counted among the elements. However, the colour meditations are considered to be kasina meditations along with the element meditations, right? So you have the earth kasina and the water kasina as well as the colour kasina. So he's probably, I imagine, grouping them in that way. Yeah. Sorry?
It's really available.
Okay, yep. So that's Ajahn Sona on the casinas. Okay, yes.
Bhante, could we go back to the first one also for a second? I have a
Please.
question about as if there were bags and things like that.
Yes.
Sorry to be gross, too much information. Are we looking at non-Canadians here?
Yes, absolutely.
And I was wondering if you...
Otherwise, why would you have a bag with openings at both ends,
Well,
right?
yeah. And then the other thing was, is that the visualization of the 32 parts only, or does it meditator become more creative and include other parts within this particular...
Look, I mean, I guess so. Yeah. I mean, that's usually that's your beginning. But if that's not, yeah. I mean, it's just a set of categorizations, right? You know how categories work. You can just divide it up different ways if you want to. Yeah. Yeah. All right. All right. Very good. Excellent. Okay, let's move on to the charnel ground contemplations. So for those of you who found the parts of the body to be squicky, then you're going to love this one. Suppose a mendicant were to see a corpse discarded in a charnel ground. It had been dead for 1, 2, or 3 days, bloated, livid, and festering. They'd compare it with their own body. This body is also of that same nature, that same kind, and cannot go beyond that. So this is one of the really important things that, again, this is most clearly where you're doing the internal and external, yeah, contemplating that body which is decomposing and then realizing that this is what's going on here as well. And so, obviously, this was a sight which was normal in those days, right? And certainly in Australia, not so much. Can't recall ever seeing a bloated body being discarded in Australia in a charnel ground. No, not so often. In Sri Lanka, do you see it? Yes? Tell us about how they dispose of bodies in Sri Lanka. Well, where would you be likely to see a dead body? Not under normal circumstances, yeah. Yeah. Right? Ah, right. Yeah. 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 But that's interesting, like that fact that you want to stop the car and look. Again, that's what I was talking before, like that fascination. Yeah? It exerts, that draws the mind actually, yeah? I mean, it's a weird fascination, but that's why you can meditate on it, because it actually does, what's that? I mean, in Thailand, you wouldn't see just sort of bodies discarded in a charnel ground normally. Normally, the practice in Thailand, or at least in northeast Thailand, of course, they would cremate bodies. So in the monastery, we would see cremations and bodies being cremated semi-regularly. Bodies would be discarded in the charnel ground if they were not discarded in the charnel ground, but they would be at least made available for that thing if, in the case of inauspicious deaths, if someone was a suicide or if there'd been a murder or something like that. So there were, from time to time, then there were corpses that the monks would go and meditate with the corpses. Not in the period that I was there at Wat Nanachat, but at some periods that did happen. Otherwise, monks will sometimes go to the, like to see the autopsy or something like that, to get that contemplation. Yeah. So, but yeah, we did see the cremations being burnt, bodies being burnt in the monastery fairly often. And probably the most disturbing part about it is because in the forest tradition you're only eating one meal a day, so you eat once in the morning and then by the afternoon you're pretty hungry, and then when they're burning the bodies it really smells like barbecue, and and I mean it's just conditioning, right? And you're not actually going to go and eat it, but still, it's like. Yeah. Grief is a funny thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the first time we're seeing the corpse discarded, bloated, liver and festering. Furthermore, one sees the corpse discarded in a charnel ground being devoured by crows, hawks, vultures, herons, dogs, tigers, leopards, jackards, and many kinds of little creatures. This body is of that same nature. Next, they see a corpse discarded in a charnel ground, a skeleton with flesh and blood held together by sinews. Also, by the way, I should mention that in the way that this is phrased in the Pali, sayatapi paseya, it puts the seeing of the corpse in an optative sense, which means it's not necessarily the literal seeing of corpse. So sometimes you would envisage it, and obviously it was something that people would see. But in meditation, this is also, because in an optative sense, it also suggests it's purely an imaginative thing. Skeleton without flesh, but smeared with blood and held together by sinews. A skeleton rid of flesh and blood, held together by sinews. Bones rid of sinews, scattered in every direction. Here a hand bone, there a foot bone, a shin bone, a thigh bone. Here a hip bone, there a rib bone, there a backbone. There an arm bone, here a neck bone, there a jaw bone. Here a tooth, there the skull. Then I am of that same nature. Then they would contemplate their body discarded in the charnel ground with white bones, the colour of shells, or decrepit bones heaped in a pile, or bones rotted and crumbled to powder. And they'd compared it to their own body. This body too is of the same nature. So the thing about this particular practice is that it has this arc that follows that process of decomposition, and from those very kind of repulsive, rotting and festering and everything, and then by the end it's actually quite cool, bones rotted and crumbled to powder. Also, this is another indication that it was an imaginative exercise, because it's rare that you could actually spend enough time to actually watch that whole process going through, right? It takes many years for the bones to crumble away into powder. But you see that slow process, and then by the end of it, it's actually not repulsive anymore, And you just see those old bones which are just clean and white and just falling to bits, and it's quite calming and quite soothing. And you realise actually you're just going back into that nature, and those feelings of that repulsion have gone away. So it's interesting that this meditation, the way that it's formed, it mirrors that emotional process of moving from a repulsion towards like an acceptance and an equanimity, which you go through that practice with the other ones, with the parts of the body and so on, but you don't actually see it in the meditation itself. But here you actually see it in the meditation. All right, let us move on and let us have a look at the contemplation of feelings. So this was the last of the body contemplations included in Satipatthana. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that these are the only kinds of body contemplation taught in the suttas. Right? Actually, a lot more different ones are taught in the suttas as well. But these are the main ones which are then here included as meditations. Observing the feelings. How does a mendicant meditate observing an aspect of the feelings? A mendicant who feels a pleasant feeling knows, I feel a pleasant feeling. When they feel a painful feeling, they know, I feel a painful feeling. When they feel a neutral feeling, they know, I feel a neutral feeling. When they feel a material pleasant feeling, sami-sang sukhang, they know, I feel a material pleasant feeling. When they feel a spiritual pleasant feeling, they know, I feel a spiritual pleasant feeling. Nirami-sang sukhang. When they feel a material painful feeling, they know, I feel a material painful feeling. When they feel a spiritual painful feeling, they know, I feel a spiritual painful feeling. When they feel a material neutral feeling, they know, I feel a material neutral feeling. And when they feel a spiritual neutral feeling, they know, I feel a spiritual neutral feeling. All right, so in Buddhism, as I'm sure you're all aware, the word Vedana, that we're translating as feeling, refers to the affective tone of a experience. So whether something is pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Feelings, what we're translating as feelings in Buddhism is not the more complex phenomenon that we call emotions in Buddhism. So, obviously in Buddhism that does talk about emotions. It talks about, jealousy and faith and all of these things, which are more complex psychological states or processes. But here, by talking about feelings, we're talking about very, very fundamental. It's very basic, actually. Yeah? And if you think you can trace back feelings you can almost think it back to like a one-celled organism. And a one-celled organism, if it can get some food, then it will go towards it. And if you put something hot there or something, then it will shrink away from it. Yeah? And then if it's just in a neutral environment, it might just do nothing. Yeah? And so actually this is basically, that's what feeling is. Yeah? That experience, wanting to move towards it, wanting to move away from it, or just not really caring about it. So feeling is a very fundamental property of all consciousness. And even kinds of consciousness that we don't really associate with feeling, right, still have that neither pleasant nor painful feeling, right? So if somebody maybe touches you on the elbow, it's not particularly pleasant or particularly painful, just there, neither pleasant nor painful feeling. Yeah? Now, in meditation, anybody who, let's do a survey here. Has anybody ever meditated and felt a pleasant feeling while meditating? Yes, good. Anyone has ever meditated and felt painful feelings? Yes, good. Anyone meditated and felt neutral feelings? Yes, good. Okay, excellent. So we all have those three feelings. They're all working. Good. We don't have to reboot the system and get those feelings working. They're all there. So it's a universal phenomenon. And certainly when we're meditating, we become so much more aware of these, right? I mean, actually, we spend much of our life searching for these things, searching for pleasure, searching to escape pain. In fact, that's really is very much what life consists of, yeah? On both like a small scale, but also on a big scale, That's why we do what we do, so we can have more pleasant feelings. And we build our lives based on our idea or our projection of what we think would be good to have a pleasant feeling, right? So you go and earn a lot of money and you get a big house and a big boat or something like that, and you get all of these things because you have this idea that it's going to give you a nice, pleasant feeling. When I'm teaching about this at the Buddhism and Psychotherapy course, I show them a clip which I always remembered from a famous show, a comedy show in Australia called Australia You're Standing in It, which I watched when I was a kid, and there was a skit called Brain Space. And I'm not sure, probably no one here knows Brain Space. Tom, do you remember Brain Space? Tim and Debbie? No, Tim and Debbie. So Tim and Debbie were these two kind of proto-hipsters, and they were all very cool and so on, and they were there talking about how material things don't bring you any satisfaction and they don't make you happy, and then Tim saying, well, I don't know, I saw this guy driving his Mercedes when I was on my way to the studio today, and he was driving his Mercedes along, and he's, you know, had this beautiful woman beside him, and they were pulling this nice boat. I don't know, he looked pretty happy to me. And Debbie's like, no, he wasn't really happy, Tim. He said, well, I don't know, Debbie, he looked pretty happy. No, he's not really happy. So, I mean, the thing is, of course, that these things can make you happy. Yeah? It's not that there's no happiness in those things, of course there is. Right? But the happiness that they give you is limited. And you're always having to search for more. And the happiness also has a lot of drawbacks. So when we're meditating, when we're learning to experience these feelings, now the very first thing this is teaching us is that we can feel those pleasant feelings inside ourselves. Right? Actually, you can just sit there and be happy. Right? No mortgages required? Yes? No. Right? You don't have to do all of these things and get all of these things. You can actually just sit there with literally nothing. Look inside your own mind and find happiness. Yeah? And it's not actually that hard in meditation. And we're not talking about some great attainment or realization of jhana or anything like that. I mean, sure, that's very much happiness. But even just simple meditation, you feel happy. That is one of the most empowering things that you can ever experience, because you know from that happiness you can find inside yourself. And once you know that, you have this sense of independence. You're not chasing it all the time. Yeah? External happiness becomes something, it's okay. Yeah? Have a nice meal. It's all right, it's nice. But if you don't get a nice meal, it's also okay. You know? And you just sort of have that feeling of independence from things, and it gives you like a strength. So, getting familiar with all of these feelings. And same thing with painful feeling, you know? And we're constantly falling into this trap of trying to escape from painful feelings. Again and again and again and again. I remember this one time. It's always kind of funny for me because it was these kind of simple moments of insight that sort of stay with you. I remember when I was at Santi, in the early days at Santi, and we were having I was having some kind of problems, and shocker, you won't believe it, but it was because of the monks who were trying to undermine us doing bhikkhuni ordination. Anyway. This one monk was trying to get me to stop doing the bhikkhuni ordination, was trying to use these kind of manipulative methods to try to get me to do what he wanted to do. And I was walking back from my kuti, and knowing that I was going to have to talk to him, and knowing this was going to be unpleasant, and like really dreading it, and really thinking, oh no. And I'm like, oh, do I have to do this? Oh, this is not going to be good. And then just realize, actually, it's just unpleasant. That's all. Is this pleasant? No. Is this fun? No. Okay, that's all right. It's just an unpleasant thing. I've had lots of unpleasant things in my life. I'm still here. It's all right. And so you realize that, and you realize, oh, okay, that's all right. And so this is what your meditation is teaching you. Actually, pain is okay. Yeah, you sit through it, it comes and it goes. Sometimes it worries you more, sometimes it doesn't really worry you, sometimes your mind is strong, sometimes your mind is weak, it's okay. So we learn over time about the way that painful feeling affects your mind. And you're training yourself in your response to that painful feeling. And over time, then you learn not to be beholden to painful feeling, right? Not to be running around trying to stop it or trying to get rid of it. With neutral feeling, of course, the thing with neutral feeling is that we normally ignore it, and so it's associated with unknowing. Right? So ignorance is neutral feeling is like painful and pleasant feeling stimulate your mind. Yeah, they make you interested one way or the other. Neutral feeling, and you switch off. Yeah, and so the mind tends to go dull, tends to not watch, not pay attention, not know, not care. Yeah, neutral feeling. Also something you learn in your meditation. Yeah, and when your mind feels that kind of neutral feeling, and often, you see that what you then look for is some kind of stimulation. Yeah? And actually, again, a lot of people's lives consists of this, right? Nothing's happening, it's pretty boring and pretty dull, so you want something, anything, right? And you've got to fill your mind with something. And so this is where the mind starts cooking up a lot of the fantasies, a lot of the thought processes, a lot of imagination, memory, and all of these things, because you want to feel something. You want to remind yourself that you're still here, that you still have emotions, that you can still feel something. And so this is the power of ignorance, which then starts to cook up all of this stuff. So then, when we meditate, if we bring mindfulness to those neutral feelings, then we learn that neutral feeling actually is quite nice. It's actually very peaceful. That's all right. Yeah. A neutral feeling isn't nothing. Yeah. Neutral feeling is just a state of balance, and you're still aware, you still know, you're still mindful, but you're not being pulled around one direction or another. So the process of meditation tends to move towards that neutral feeling. I mean, we need to develop those pleasant feelings in order to deepen the mind and pull the mind into samadhi. But the process of samadhi then gradually sheds those pleasant feelings and leads towards equanimity. All right, so after talking about these three main feelings, the sutta then goes on to distinguish between the material pleasant feeling and spiritual pleasant feeling. This is samisa and niramisa. Can anybody tell us what is a material pleasant feeling? Should be a pretty straightforward one. Ice cream. Okay. Well, ice cream itself isn't, but the feeling that you get from ice cream is, yes? Unless you eat it too quickly, in which case it's painful, right? But yes, the sensation of eating ice cream, fine, that's good. What about a spiritual pleasant feeling? Ice cream also. A very honest and vulnerable question there. Answer Nilushi, and congratulations on that honesty. Yeah. Any other suggestions? Like better ice cream, yeah. A spiritual pleasant feeling. A nimitta, yeah. So again, the nimitta itself isn't the feeling, right? So, but the nimitta is associated with the feeling, yeah. So it's the feelings associated with samadhi, yeah. So generally speaking, the spiritual pleasant feeling is any pleasant feeling which is associated with letting go and which is associated with the path of practice. So even like the pleasure of dana, yeah, the happiness that you get from serving and helping others, yeah, anything like this which comes from goodness can be considered a spiritual pleasant feeling, but especially the feelings that you experience in the jhanas. Yeah, so this is especially what it means here. Okay. Material painful feeling. Feeling after you've eaten too much ice cream. Anyone give an example of material painful feeling? Okay, your leg cramps up. Good. That's very painful. Yeah. Okay. What about a spiritual painful feeling? Knowing you messed up. Yeah. Yeah. So you get like a kind of a negative emotion. And a spiritual painful feeling could be something like what you're saying there, that sense of remorse, knowing that you've done something wrong. And in the suttas it's described also as being that feeling when you long for those liberations that you have yet to achieve. Yeah? You're yearning, why haven't I got anywhere so far? Yeah? When will I realize that same freedom that the Arahants realize? Yeah? So this is a spiritual, painful feeling. Good. What about a material, neutral feeling? So the citta is the mind, and in meditation contexts, the word citta is closely associated with the sense of samadhi. So there are many words for the mind in Pali, but in meditation we have like citta sampada or citta bhavana and so on, all of which are terms for samadhi. And in cittanupassana we also see a close connection with the development of samadhi. But not from the beginning though. At the beginning, how are you contemplating the mind? Sa ragang va cittang sa ragang cittanti pajanati. So notice how the phrasing of this is very precise. You're not looking at greed, right? You're looking at the mind. Yeah? But it's the mind as it's affected or influenced by the greed. So the mind itself is awareness. It's knowing. Yeah? And when you have greed in your mind, then that changes how you know. It changes the nature of knowing. Yeah? It changes the nature of knowing. When the mind is free of greed, then it changes the nature of knowing. Vidaragang vacittang. So we're not looking at the focus of this is not the greed or not the freedom from greed, but it's what the mind is like when it's affected by these different states. Yeah? This is a very subtle point. And cittanupassana is a subtle meditation. Yeah? We've already been through all of these other stages, right? The Dhamma, the Kaya, Passana, the Vedananupassana, coming to the Cittanupassana. It's a subtle thing, it's a subtle point. Easy to misunderstand and misconstrue. And if we haven't developed the meditation through those other stages, we will misunderstand it. And you will inevitably, well, almost inevitably, you will look at the things that the mind is aware of, instead of looking at the mind. Yeah? You'll get distracted. This is what we spend our life doing. We spend our life looking at all of those fancy things out there. Yeah? But what this is asking us to do is to look at the looker, to know the knower. Yeah? Not easy to do. Not easy at all. Very, very subtle. Yeah? And this only comes as the mind is deepening in meditation, and you start to be able to see almost like the reflection or the mirror image of the mind in your meditation practice. Similarly with hate, you're not looking at hate or the absence of hate, you're looking at the mind as it is affected by hate or as it's affected by the freedom from hate. And you see how that works. Like when your mind is affected by hate, you can feel the heat of it, yeah? The constriction of it. Yeah? You can feel it's cracking. It's almost like distorted or perverted. The mind is not how it should be. And then when the hate goes, your mind feels so open, so free, so lovely. Yeah? And so you see how your mind is affected by these different states. This is the practice of cittanupassana. Mind with delusion, right? Falling asleep or scattered, right? Mind just, where am I? And again, if you're not looking at the delusion itself, you're looking at how it affects your mind. Yeah? It's muddy, it's dark, it's unclear. And then when the mind is clear, when the wisdom is strong, you see, it's like crystal. Okay. Mind which is constricted and scattered. Yeah? So constricted, the mind, probably what you're talking about before. Yeah, that kind of thing. And that's very common when you're in that kind of state, when you're a bit tired. Yeah, happens to all of us. And then scattered. Also happens to all of us. Yeah. So this is the first half of it. So basically we're looking at the mind as it is affected by these different kinds of defilements or the freedom from them. And the next four, the remaining part of the contemplation of mind, we're looking at in a way for the inverse. So rather than looking at the things which are afflicting the mind and the freedom from those afflictions, we're looking at the developed mind, the beautiful mind, and the lack of that beautiful mind. So the mahagatang cittang. And all of these phrases, mahagatang cittang, the anuttarang cittang, the samahitang cittang, vimutang cittang, these are all terms for jhana or samadhi. So these are all seeing the minds in these different states of samadhi and the mind out of those different states. And once again, when in those states, the mind changes. How you are aware changes. And it's something which is quite different. It's like another realm. And so these kinds of descriptions, the mind which is mahagatang literally means has grown great. Yeah, mind which is not supreme, or mind which is supreme, anuttarang, there's nothing better than it. Samahitang, yeah, immersed in samadhi, or vimutang vachitang, the mind which is freed. And remember, when the Buddha was using these terms, he was quite serious. Like the Buddha had high standards, right? If he's saying that this is the unexcelled mind, the mind that which there is nothing better than it, he really meant it. He didn't mean this is a pretty good mind, right? He didn't mean this is a mind that's okay, all things considered, right? He meant this is really the most pure that your mind can become. Yeah? So this is already talking at a very, very profound level of meditation. Yes, I...
Are there the states where someone has gone through a jhana and they come out of the jhana and then they have that situation of hindrances for a period of time?
Right, yep. Yep.
Is that the only way to see these things?
That's the only way to really see them, yeah. Yeah, and you're seeing that state and you see afterward and you see what's the difference between them, you know? And you say, okay. Yeah, and you realize it's not, you can get a hint as to what these experiences are beforehand, right? But you can't really see what they are until you've known those states for yourself.
So when people say they're doing cittanupassana, maybe they have to be at least to experience somewhere of the jhana experience to do the cittanupassana.
To do it fully, yes. Yeah, and this is one of the things, at the end of the sutta it says, if you do this satipatthana, then you can realize the Dhamma in 7 days, right? But the thing that people miss about that, right? They say, you can do satipatthana, you can get realize the Dhamma in 7 days. Okay, I'm just skipping forward here, right? But the bit that people miss about that are these two little awkward words here: Satipatthane evang bhaveya. Evang bhaveya, right? You have to practice it in this way. Yeah? And not just doing what you think Satipatthana is, but doing all of this stuff, right? Yeah? And there's a lot, and it's very demanding, and it's very subtle. And heck, we're only halfway through. So it's a very profound sutta, and the meditations it's talking about is very profound. So yes, if you practice it, evang bhaveya, sure, maybe you can get enlightened in as little as 7 days. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that if you just do a mindfulness technique for 7 days that you're going to get enlightened. Right? It's not. That's kind of wishful thinking. Yeah. All right. Any other questions on the Cittanupassana before we go on? Ling.
There's different types of meditations. Would you say that to suit each individual's personality
Right.
and characteristics and state of mind and
Yeah.
levels of spiritual growth?
Oh, definitely, yeah. So definitely there are different meditations that will suit different people. Now in terms of the Satipatthanas, generally speaking, we should start with the Kayanupassana, and that's where we're talking about like developing your basic meditations, and everybody should be doing that. Should be doing some walking meditation, some sitting meditation, some mindfulness of breathing, and these foundational practices, yeah. But the details in the way you develop it will vary from person to person. And, the Buddha taught these things in so many different ways. For some people, maybe developing Brahma Viharas will be the way, or for some people, watching their feelings can be very effective, and so on. So there are different avenues for different people. But whatever your practice is, a good grounding on Kayanupassana is really essential. Yeah. And that's one of the main things, Tom, that addresses the problem you were asking before about people sort of getting lost in the stuff, and getting too caught up in things. Is that grounding in that just reality, and then you don't get swept away by the worlds of the mind that are opened up to you. It's just you're constantly coming back to the present. And one of the things about the physical realm and the Kayanupassana is it's always present. The past and the future only exist in your mind. So if you are in your senses, then you are, by definition, present. Yeah? Mesu dhammanupassi viharati. So as I mentioned before, many different ways of translating Dhamma here, but I think the intended sense is as the principles, ultimately meaning the principles of the Dhamma or the principles of cause and effect. Right? Let's have a look at why I say that, like why this is the case. The first of these is the 5 hindrances. Now, we haven't discussed the 5 hindrances much so far, but of course a very important topic in meditation, and we're going to be looking at them in some more detail later on. But for now, just briefly, the 5 hindrances are sensual desire, ill will, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. And each one of them, they follow through the same pattern. And let's have a look at how that pattern plays out. So a mendicant who has sensual desire in them understands, I have sensual desire in me. Number 1. Okay, so first of all, this is okay, first of all, like, it's important as meditators that we are real about where we are at. Don't pretend that this is not happening. That's what I call spiritual bypassing. Actually, I'm feeling full of lust or full of desire or full of hate or something like that, but no. We try to pretend it's not there. First thing is you understand it's there. It's okay. When you recognize that it's there, you are doing satipatthana. That's how it works. That's how mindfulness works. That's how wisdom works. This is the path to liberation, to recognize what these things are happening. And these things are all normal, right? There's no shame in them. There's nothing wrong with them, but it's just that they're leading to dukkha, that's all. Actually, it's normal, nothing wrong. But you can keep on thinking those thoughts as long as you like. That's all right. You can keep on thinking them for the rest of your life. Next lifetime too. And the one after that, and the one after that, and the one after that. Yeah? But it's just not going to get you anywhere, that's all. So that desire, first of all, you recognize that that's happening. So notice here, again in the Cittanupassana, the object of your awareness was the mind, right? So your mind, the thing that you are aware of is your mind, and you're aware of how your mind is affected by desire. Here it's different. Here you are aware of the desire directly. Okay, that's what you're pointing to. That's what you're focusing on. I have that desire in me. When you don't have it in you, you understand, I don't have sensual desire in me. This also is a very important, very profound point, because normally we don't pay attention to the things that are not there. Right? You only pay attention to things that are there. Yeah? But the things that are not there are just as important. Now, if we only pay attention to the things that are there, this is why we tend to think that, I'm full of greed, hatred, and delusion. Because whenever you notice things, you notice when those things are there. You don't actually notice when there's no greed there. Maybe you're just walking along the path and you don't actually have any greed. But you don't pay any attention. You're not noticing it. Actually, my mind's actually quite okay now. I'm not really wanting anything. I'm not angry at anybody. But we just think it's not important. We don't notice it. So this is part of that evenness of attention, right? And here we're starting to apply these skills that we have trained ourselves in when we were developing, for example, Vedananupassana. Right? When we're developing Vedananupassana, we learn that evenness of attention. Feels pleasant, we pay attention. Yeah? Feels painful, we pay attention. Feels neutral, we pay attention. And we're not letting our mind be pulled this way and that by the various forces. And now we're starting to see the benefit of that, because you're starting to notice, actually, when that desire goes away, I'm still here. I can still be aware of that. I can be aware of that absence. Yeah? They understand how sensual desire arises, how when it's already arisen, it's given up, and how once it's given up, it doesn't arise again in the future. And this is where we're starting to look at cause and effect. Right? Previously in the sutta, we looked at when something was there, you have a pleasant feeling, or you don't have a pleasant feeling. That's it. Two things. It's there, or it isn't there. Now, that's just the start. It's there, it's not there. Yeah? How does it come to be? Where does it come from? What is it that causes it? Yeah? This is the start. This is the beginnings where we're beginning to go into the understanding side, the vipassana side. Yeah? How the sensual desire arises. How? When it's already arisen, it's given up. But of course, this is the four right efforts also, right? So this is understanding the four right efforts. But now we're not just being able to do them, but we're understanding how it all works. Yeah? Yeah? Yatha cha upannasa kama chandasa pahanang hoti tancha pajanati. You're understanding these things. And how once it's given up, it doesn't arise again in the future. So this, of course, is talking about the plane of liberation. So for somebody who's freed, then they give these things up completely and they do not arise again in the future. So the same thing applies for the other hindrances: ill will, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. And in each case, you know when they're present, you know when they're absent, and you know when they are already there, and when they're given up, and you know how they arise, how they're given up, and how they come to not arise in the future. So this is a really good framework for a meditation practice, and I recommend that you do this practice from time to time, right? So go through and just contemplate the 5 hindrances, all right? Ask yourself, which of the hindrances are in me at the moment? And go through the checklist, okay? Do I have hate in me? Yes. I have hate for so many things. I hate injustice. Yes. I hate bad coffee. There's so many things that are worth hating in the world, right? But is that hate actually present in you at the moment? And, sorry? No, that is no hint. No. I could have said I have desire for good coffee. I should have said that. No. Where was I? Oh, yes. So by using it as a checklist, and by going through, that means you're actually training yourself to watch those things, to watch the absence of those things. Yeah? Do I have these things in me now? Do I have doubt in me now? Yeah? Oh, actually, no. Oh, it's all right. I feel okay. Reasonably confident, getting on. Okay, that's good. And so you continue. How do these things come to arise? Yeah. So you don't want to do this all the time, right? So what you do is you train yourself by doing this practice, yeah, from time to time. And then that primes your mind to be able to notice and understand these hindrances. Yeah? Of course, you will only really understand them when you develop your mind fully and you'll be able to abandon all the hindrances through jhanas, right? And so actually the abandoning of all of these things is the practice of jhanas. So once again, as we've seen from the beginning, like even under Vedananupasana, the Niramisa Sukha, implies the practice of jhanas, and then in Cittanupassana also the various states of mind there imply the practice of jhanas, and so here as well the really deeply giving up of these things imply the practice of jhanas. So traditionally in the analysis of these hindrances and the various kinds of defilements, there are really three kinds of giving up of these defilements, right? Or non-existence of them. One is the kind of the ordinary non-existence of them, when they just don't happen to be there, right? And there's just nothing that actually happens to have stimulated them. But if something comes along and does stimulate it, then it's going to be there. The second thing is if they are suppressed through the practice of jhanas, and so that means that to a deep level they're going to be pushed away. That means that normally, if that happens, then normally when you come out of the jhana, that you won't experience those feelings again for quite some time, right? They will come back, but they're not going to just pop back immediately, right? You're not going to come out of a jhana and then immediately think, oh, I'm going to go and get some ice cream now, right? Okay? It's going to take some time, yeah? And if you're practicing jhanas regularly, yeah, and you can do it, then you can actually keep those hindrances suppressed for a long time. And it can be many years. This is why sometimes people can think that they are enlightened when they're not yet, because they've managed to successfully suppress that practice. And jhanas are very, very powerful, right? So they just kick the hindrances like right out of the stadium, you know? It's just gone. And it's just like, they can come back, but it's just going to take a while. It's not like they just immediately bubble up right again. But they still will come back because it's still conditioned, and jhanas are still a conditioned state, so that then the plane of liberation is where these things are given up fully. When I was in Thailand, I saw a lot of this kind of thing, even among the monks or among people. It's like, who's got the most enlightened master, or who's got this, and everyone will be telling all of these stories and all of these kinds of things. And it's like, one of the things that you notice, right, is that none of the enlightened masters or the teachers who they were talking about, none of them actually spoke like that. They weren't going around saying, oh, I'm more enlightened than the other guy, right? Everybody else was saying that about them, but they weren't saying that. Anyway, let's move along. Contemplation of the hindrances, and what's next? Did we miss? What? Oh, no, the hindrances. All right, so then, okay. Now, I believe, and as I mentioned before at the beginning, that the Satipatthana Sutta as we have it today has been somewhat expanded in the Pali tradition. And one of the expansions of that is the addition of a few items to the Dhammanupassana. In fact, I can just show you one of the reasons why I think that is the case. Let's have a look at something on Sutta Central, which will blow your mind. Well, maybe it won't blow your mind. What's going on? No, you won't look at it on Sutta Central because it's not working. Please work. Thank you. So let's have a look in the Abhidhamma and the Abhidhamma Vibhanga, the book of analysis. So this is one of the early books of the Abhidhamma, which largely takes passages from the suttas and then analyzes them and gives some commentary on them. And here we have the Satipatthana Vibhanga, translated by the ever wonderful Bhikkhu Ananda Jyoti. And the history of this is that Ananda Jyoti, I talked about this in my book, A History of Mindfulness, and Ananda Jyoti found that to be an interesting discussion, so he decided to translate this particular section of the Vibhanga. And when he translated it, he decided to, so just to sort of backdrop, if you haven't known Venerable Ananda Jyoti or what he does, Ananda Jyoti is a monk who's just been sort of living by himself and quietly working away for many years, doing some of the most sophisticated and detailed studies of texts that you'll find anywhere in Buddhism. And he's done a number of translations of all of these different difficult Sanskrit texts and all of these metrical analysis and all of these like reconciling Pali and Sanskrit versions and all of these kinds of things. We're using his chanting book, of course, for the thing. So, and he's just got to quietly go along doing these. And he said that this was the hardest thing that he's ever done, because the Abhidhamma passages are very abbreviated. And he wanted to see if he could expand them all out and spell them all out in full. And this is something that people sometimes ask with the suttas. They say, can't we have a version of the suttas where we don't have any abbreviations? We just spell everything out in full? And I'm like, go for it. But once you try to do it, it's not easy. Yeah? So the first part of it's pretty straightforward enough, but then when it gets to later, you can see actually the pale version, the pale text, is the bits that he's had to expand from the abbreviation, right? Because this is found elsewhere. So these things are only defined in the other parts of the Abhidhamma. Anyway, here we have Satipatthana, contemplating the body and so on and so forth. Then explains the contemplation of the body, head hairs. So the contemplation of the parts of... Now, you see, you have to understand, normally in the Abhidhamma, right, Abhidhamma expands everything. So normally you expect things in the Abhidhamma to be more complicated than they are in the suttas, okay? This always happens, right? The Abhidhamma gets everything from the suttas, puts it all together and expands the things we find in the suttas. Uniquely, and I do believe this is virtually unique in the Abhidhamma, in this particular passage it's actually shorter than it is in the suttas. Okay? So the contemplation of the body, head, hair, body, hair, nails, teeth, skin, and that's it. Okay? So this is the only meditation that's included under body, no anapanasati, no postures, no corpse meditations, none of those things, okay? Only the parts of the body. Then it gives a word analysis and so on, which we don't need to go into. Contemplation of feelings, same as in the suttas. Contemplation of mind, again, the same as in the suttas. And then when a contemplation of dhammas is interesting, so Ananda Jyoti translated it as contemplation of the nature of things. It's a similar meaning to what the sense I'm getting at with the idea of principles. So the first one is knowing sense desire, knowing ill will, sloth and torpor, agitation and worry and doubt, so the 5 hindrances. So same as the suttas. But then the aggregates, not there. The sense bases, also not there. The next one, it goes over to the sati sambojjhanga, yeah? The mindfulness factor of, the awakening factor of mindfulness and investigation of dhammas and so on. So the 7 sambojjhangas. And then I think, is that it? I think that's all. I don't think it has even the 4 Noble Truths. So in both the contemplation of the body and the contemplation of dhammas, the Abhidhamma version is actually significantly shorter than the sutta version in Pali. And now that itself would be interesting, but that fact that it's significantly shorter is also the case in the various Chinese versions. Okay? So consistently we find that and it's also the case won't go into it in too much, but anyway, so there's fairly broad-based evidence, I think, that originally the contemplation of dhammas was meant to be the 5 hindrances and the 7 awakening factors. All right? Not the other things, so not the aggregates, not the senses. 4 Noble Truths maybe, but those 2 were not there. Another reason for thinking that is because in the I won't go into it in too much. I won't go into too much detail. You can read my book, A History of Mindfulness, if you want to know all of the details about why that is so. So I'm going to kind of skip over the contemplation of the aggregates and senses. Obviously, these are important topics. I'm not saying that these topics are invented or anything like that. I'm simply saying that they were probably added in this particular place a bit later on. That's all. So I'm going to skip over.
Say later on
How much later? After the schisms, right? Because the other versions in Chinese, we have a version which is probably the Mahasangika school. So Mahasangika and the Theravada was like the first schism. So if it's different, then that means that it must have been developed after that, right? I mean, again, still it's substantially similar, right? It's not like a completely different thing, but there are these variations. So I think after the first schism, and the first schism was sometime after the time of Ashoka. So I'm thinking maybe 200 to 300 years after the Buddha. Yeah, which would make it one of the latest of the suttas in the Pali Canon. Yeah. Okay. Okay, anyway, I'm going to skip from the hindrances to the awakening factors, and these 2 things are very often paired together, right? So the hindrances are the negative forces in the mind that obstruct your meditation, and the awakening factors are the positive forces in your mind which empower your meditation. And we have a similar process of contemplation with both of those things. When you have the awakening factor of mindfulness in you, you understand, I have the awakening factor of mindfulness in me. When you don't have the awakening factor of mindfulness in you, you understand, I don't have that awakening factor of mindfulness in me. I understand how the awakening factor of mindfulness that has not arisen comes to be, and how the awakening factor of mindfulness that has arisen becomes fulfilled by development. So once again, the contemplation of causality. Why? Why are you mindful? Where do these things come from? Not just aware that it's there or not there, but how does it come to be? You know? And as before, of course, to truly fulfill it by development ultimately means becoming an arahant. Right? That's when it's really fulfilled. I mean, we can fulfill it along the way, but that's what it means. The awakening factor of investigation of principles, the awakening factor of energy, of rapture, of tranquility, of immersion, and of equanimity. So all of these things become fulfilled through development. And finally, the last part in the Dhammanupassana is the contemplation of the 4 Noble Truths. You understand this is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering, this is the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. All right. Actually, I wish I could read some more suttas from the Satipatthana Samyutta, but we're a bit running out of time. All right, so I'll just wrap up the sutta for now. And we've had the Four Noble Truths, so we're good. Excellent. Yes, and as I've said so many times before in the course, when it has this kind of exposition, this is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, and so on, then this implies stream entry. So at the least stream entry. Now, so then we go on to the promise of results. Okay, so it's not quite a sort of guarantee, but okay. So if you practice these 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, evang bhaveya, yeah, in this way, yeah, for 7 years, can expect one of 2 results: either enlightenment in the present life, dittheva dhamme anya. So anya is a specialized term. It's like so many terms in Buddhism. It is, on the one hand, is just a general term. Actually, it just means knowledge. Yeah? But in the suttas, it invariably refers to arahantship. Okay, so anya is, sorry? Anyata kondanya. Although in anyata kondanya's context, he wasn't actually an arahant, was he? So that's an exception. I shouldn't have said invariably. Usually means arahant. Well, he became an arahant soon afterwards, so good enough. But in the suttas, generally speaking, it means arahantship. But yes, the same as anya kondanya or anyata kondanya. And dittheva dhamme, yeah, in the present life. Yeah. Sati va upadisese anagamita. So it's just in case you're confused, for those who are Pali students here, sati here is not mindfulness. Sati here means there is. Yes, there is. Or if there is a remnant of something left over, upadisese. Literally, sesa is something left over. Yeah, yeah, and this is a somewhat controversial little compound here. Sometimes translated as if upadi was grasping, upadana, right? And so then there would be, if there's a remnant of grasping, then you're a non-returner. I mean, it's obviously not incorrect, right? But in fact, linguistically, this is not upadana, this is upa and adi. Yeah? Adi meaning from the beginning. Yeah? So it really just means like a remnant, something left over from the start. Yeah? Anusaya, no, different word, yeah. Upadi. Okay, so it's upadi sese. If sativa upadi sese, if there is something left over from the beginning, then non-return. So this, of course, is the 3rd of the 4 stages of enlightenment, and so the non-returner has only 1 rebirth, and they get to go to the pure abodes and hang out there with the other non-returners before they become enlightened. Not always. Not all non-returners go to the pure abodes. Who can tell me 2 kinds of non-returners that don't go to the pure abodes? Obscure Dhamma knowledge here. No? 2 kinds? Yes. Awesome. Thank you. Very good. And? There's some that go upon landing. I was kind of grouping them before, but yes, so there are some non-returners, right? They die as still a non-returner, and just before they get reborn, they get enlightened in between. Yeah, so this is one. And there's a couple of different stages, right? They cool down in between and so on. So obviously, thanks to Giovanni. But also some non-returners also get reborn in the formless realms. So if you're a non-returner and you're practicing the formless jhanas, then that kind of it supersedes the birth in the pure abodes, so you actually go to the formless realms. Anyway, So, let alone 7 years. Tantu bhikkhave sattavasani, yohi kochi bhikkhave, ime chataru satipatthane evang bhave chattvasani. 6 years. Doesn't seem like long, does it? What were you doing 6 years ago? Seems like yesterday, right? What have we been wasting our time doing? We could have been practicing satipatthana and getting enlightened instead. 5, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 7 months, 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, 3 months, 2 months, 1 month, fortnight, let alone a fortnight. Anyone who develops these 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation in this way for 7 days. Satahang. Tasa duinang palanang anitarang palang patkankang. So again, the critical term, evang bhaveya. The 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation are the path to convergence. They are in order to purify sentient beings, to get past sorrow and crying, to make an end of pain and sadness, to end the cycle of suffering, and to realize extinguishment. Nyaya sa adhigamaya. That's what I said, and this is why I said it. So, the Satipatthana Sutta.